Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the second day of Out of Scale. Apparently, rumors of gas explosions were greatly exaggerated. I don't know what's happening. For those who are joining us just for the first time, I don't know if there are any new faces. My name is Stephen Whiteman. I teach Chinese art at the Courtauld, and I'm the faculty sponsor for this event organized by Wenjie of Princeton University and Wang of Hong Kong Baptist University. Without any further ado, therefore, I want to hand over the microphone podium to my colleague Sujata Miyama, who teaches Buddhist art here at the Courtauld. And yeah, that's it. We'll kick off for the day. Thank you very much for coming.
Good morning, everyone. It's so exciting to be here with all of you today, especially after yesterday's really fascinating series of talks and as well as the keynote. So today we've got two speakers who are taking us into the sacred realms in very different ways. And we will be following, I guess, yesterday's format where we will have the two speakers speak at the beginning and then we'll have questions at the end. There is a slight change today. One of our speakers, sadly, Yizhou, couldn't obtain his visa, I believe, and so we will be having a pre-recorded lecture, and I think Romy is going to take care of all the logistics for that, but I just want to thank Yizhou for taking the time to record that lecture, and he is, our speaker is an assistant professor of Chinese art and Buddhism at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and he's just completing a book on Pure Lands in early medieval China, and actually we'll be hearing a little bit about Sukhavati or Pure Lands in Chinese Buddhism and Buddhist art. And following Yizhou's lecture, we'll have Professor Elena Cadio, who's here in person, and will be sharing her research with us, and then at the very end we'll have the Q&A, and we are going to invite just this keynote speaker, Professor Lin from the University of Chicago, to join us at the panel discussion later. So that's kind of like the format for today. It's slightly different, but we are all in for some really good sort of lectures. And Romy, I'm going to turn it over to you to screen the video. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Zhao Yi from Hong Kong, and I'm really sorry that because of some unexpected visa reason that I cannot be physically with you to attend this conference. So I'm making this short video to introduce my research project. So the title for my talk is A Path to Paradise, Reevaluating Pure Land Belief in the Northern Dynasties with the 9 Buddha Halo Miniature Shrines. As you can see on your screen, and this is my key piece. And I'm really glad that the keynote speaker of this symposium is Professor Wei Zhenglin, and I don't know if he still remember that. I actually came across this image in the Chinese Object Studies workshop led by him and also Professor Catherine Jiang in 2018, so it's about, or maybe 2017, it's about 8 years ago. So this piece really attracted my attention because it has a very unusual pictorial program on its reverse. And also, if we are looking at the front side of this image, on the halo of this Buddha, it actually has 9 smaller Buddhas, 9 manifesting Buddhas. So that is also a very unusual number. At the first glance, except for the theme of 2 Buddhas sitting in a stupa, as you can see here, we have 2 Buddhas sitting in a stupa. Coming from the Treasure Stupa chapter of the Lotus Sutra, we know something about that. But beyond this motif, what we know about this piece is actually very limited. What's interesting is that the Nelson piece does not stand as a unique or single piece. So far, I have identified at least 15 such examples or such pieces of the same type, and I organized them into a chart and attached here. And I'm pretty sure there can be more such examples spread in the collections all over the world. I just did not find them. You may have noticed that I actually arranged them into three subtypes, A, B, and C. I create these subtypes mainly based on the typology of the robe drapery of the main Buddha and the linear flame patterns on his aureole, or maybe on the rim of his aureole. And this is an example of type C, a very shiny miniature bronze ring with a height of about 10 centimeters. And as we can see, the robe of the Buddha is very mannerized. The draperies were represented by very dense parallel lines covering the whole body of the Buddha image. And the string-like quality of the drapery of the Buddha is called Shanxi style or Fuxian style. So the term was first invented by Oswald Siren and later adopted by Masuba Sablo. So this type of drapery has already been well researched, and we know that it emerged in the mid to late Northern Wei dynasty. It was produced between 500 CE and until 550. Also, the linear flame pattern on the rim of the Buddha's aureole shows the same tendency. It's quite dense, straight, and geometric. And now let's look at type B. So it's basically very similar, but if we are only looking at the flame pattern, you can see that the lines representing the flame pattern gets more curvy. And if we are looking at type A, the curvy lines even turn into kind of a wave-shaped line, so it gets more like a curvy. So what we know about this object, we actually know some locations about this object. So within these 15 pieces, actually 5 of them, we had the information about their activating or buying location. And they are Zhenyuan County in Gansu province, Guyuan city in Ningxia, Tianshui city in Gansu, and also Xi'an. And for the Shanghai Museum piece, we have records showing that actually the museum also acquired it from Xi'an. So these regions are actually quite close to each other on the map. So they forming a region comprising the southern part of Ningxia, the eastern part of Gansu, and also western part of Shanxi. So this area is actually the heartland of the two Qin kingdoms in the northern and southern dynasties, the later Qin and the western Qin. So here I'm calling the regions Qinzhou. After knowing the region, so my approach is, for the sake of time, I'm not going to analyze in detail about how I date the type A, B, and C, but I'm just showing my approach. So I'm comparing the stylistic feature of these miniature shrines with the cave shrines in this Qinzhou area. And first, I found many similarities. For example, if we are looking at the main Buddha in Yizhou at Binglingsi Cave 169, which is early 5th century cave, you can see the Buddha also have 9 small Buddha, or 9 manifestation Buddhas on his halo. So the number 9 is really rare, for the smaller Buddhas on the aureole. The typical number is 7 that represents the 7 Buddha of the past. So I think the 9 Buddha is actually a regional style of this Qinzhou area. And also, if we're looking at this very famous earliest Amitabha or Amitabha Buddha image in China, also in the Bingling's Cave 169, we see this wave-shaped line flame pattern. So looking at another sculpture of the same time period in the same cave, and we see this very similar type of flame pattern. And if we are going slightly southward to look at the Maichishan Cave, so we can also see this very dense string-like quality of the robe that covers the body of the Buddha. So my conclusion for that part is that I think the flame pattern and also the robe drapery, the tendency of its development is from being more realistic to more geometric to being more abstract. So the Shanxi style, the type C is the latest group and type A is the earliest group. So the tendency is become more and more abstract. Okay, and now let's turn to the image itself, and that's the fun part. So the upper register of this image is usually identified as Maitreya, Mile in the Tushita heaven, first by Masubala and later followed by many scholars. I think this identification is actually pretty problematic. The main evidence of such argument is the visual similarity between the back relief and many sculpture complexes in the cave temples of Yungang and also in some Liangzhou caves. However, for all such cases, as you can see on the stone stele on the right side, the Maitreya is always seated in the cross-ankled posture, which serves as the major iconographical feature or indicator to identify the deity. In contrast, the Buddha on the top of the Qinzhou shrine is always seated in meditation. Furthermore, in previous examples, the Maitreya is placed under a single structure with supporting columns representing the Tushita Heaven Palace, which happen to be somewhat similar with the trapezoidal space in the Qinzhou shrine relief. However, the trapezoidal space on the Qinzhou shrine is shaped by 4 roofs, which seems to suggest an open ground or open space framed by 4 or more structures or 4 more buildings. Therefore, I consider the Yungang examples of Maitreya in Tushita Heaven is significantly different from the top register of the reverse here. So it cannot serve as the model or prototype for our pieces. On the contrary, I consider some subsidiary motifs extremely important in terms of understanding the meaning of the relief. The 2 small figures in circular aureoles placed on the bottom corners of the top register is very interesting. After close observation, we can tell that the figure on your left side is seated in a curled posture with his 2 hands encircling his legs at his knees. The oval-shaped background of his is not an aureole since it does not fully cover his body. Part of his head is outside this oval. It seems to be some kind of large pedestal or mat that he is sitting on. This pose can be further perceived through another example at the Fair Gallery, now it's National Museum of Asian Art. The Fair piece treats this detail in a slightly different way. Either the left or the right side figure was depicted as a squat man facing the Buddha with both hands encircling his curled legs at his knees. The other figure on the right side of the Nelson piece is even more interesting. He's probably seated in the lotus posture with his 2 hands naturally extending downward and joining at the front of his body. Moreover, there is a protrusion above his head, which seems to be some kind of headdress. But observing more carefully, we can tell that the curled figure is actually sealed in a space which resembles the shape of a lotus spot. This strongly suggests a type of figure called reborn on lotuses, the form of rebirth in Sukhavati, which is the Western Pure Land of Amitabha or Amitabha Buddha, the same deity. In the longer Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, it describes the rebirth in Sukhavati as reborn on a 7-treasure lotus flower, 七宝莲花, or 七宝花. In the sutra on the visualization of the Amitabha Buddha, it describes 9 degrees of rebirth according to the respective karmic merit of the deceased. So all of them take the form of emerging in an open lotus flower. The difference is only the duration that the newly reborn spent in the closed lotus spot before the opening of its leaves, before the moment of blossoming. The worse karma you have, the longer you actually stayed inside the lotus spot. So if we are looking at the Xiaonanhai relief, as also a 6th century relief, it is a good example showing this idea, and we have some inscriptions showing the particular grade and level of the rebirth that the figure is representing. For example, for this one, I think the 中品下生, so the middle level, lower grade. Oh, 中品上生, the middle level, upper grade. Okay. So if that is the case, the left side figure mentioned earlier can be viewed as in a later stage of rebirth than the right one. He is seated on a round lotus when the bud is fully open. His posture still displays as a restrained, curled up quality, which echoes the state of newly reborn. This idea can be further testified by other pieces of this type. in the piece at the National Museum of Oriental Art in Italy. So here we have a modern photo, but I still think the old photo is actually showing a better state of preservation of this piece. We can see that the red figure is still a sitting man in the lotus spot, while the left side figure is depicted as a figure stretching himself in the posture like the Chinese character Da, as you can see here, and also we can see in this line drawing. The three lotus leaves here are neither fully open nor fully closed. They are right in the process of blossoming. The stretching posture also echoes the state of newly reborn after being sealed in a lotus spot for a long time. The other pieces are very similar as the Nelson one. In the top register, the paradise setting was formed simply by 4 Chinese roofs. This might be due to the practical concern of saving space on such a very tiny little space of bronze. However, I think the decision to omit the main body of the architectural structures could be intentionally made to indicate the suspending quality of the architectures in the Western paradise, as actually indicated in many Buddhist literatures of this time. The bottom register is a depiction of two Buddha. Okay, let's go back for a little bit. So the bottom register is a depiction of the 2 Buddhas seated in a stupa, and this is the most common Buddhist motif in the 5th century China, derived from the treasure stupa chapter of the Lotus Sutra. The many-treasured Buddha Prabhupada miraculously appeared with his stupa to verify the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, while Shakyamuni Buddha is lecturing on it. Shakyamuni Buddha was invited to sit in the stupa together with the Prabhupada Buddha to continue his sermon or continue his lecture. As we can see here, the 2 Buddhas were seated together. Okay, so before proceeding to the middle register, let's first look at a similar relief on a stele from the Wanfo Temple in Sichuan province. The stele was produced in early to mid-6th century, so about the same time as our Type C pieces. The relief can be easily divided into 2 sections demarcated by a bridge over the river. The upper section depicts the paradise of Sukhavati, whereas the lower section is identified as a transformation of the chapter Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, Guanyin Pusa Pu Menping, from the Lotus Sutra by Yujing Wang. So the lower and upper section are organized in 2 very different ways. Visually speaking, the lower section, now we can look at the ink rubbing, it actually shows the better situation. So the lower section is heavy and chaotic, while the upper section was organized in a very clear and ordered logic. Although the linear perspective embodied here is not perfectly scientific, it still gives the viewer a sense of harmony and volumetric depth by the using of recession and foreshortening. As Dorothy Wang already noted, in the upper section, there are multiple sets of orthogonal lines proceeding from the sides and converging on the central axis of this stele on several different points. More specifically, the converging point for the recession lines deriving from the handrails of the entrance bridge locates on the vertex of the smaller triangle representing the open ground between the 2 rows of audience disciples. Then the converging point keeps moving upward along with the upward movement of sight until stopping at the Amitavi's place, until the sight was blocked by several parallel ball stick lines, which stops the upward movement of the sight. So here I argue that the converging perspective, together with the polycentric quality of the lower section, invites the upward movement of sight from the bottom to the top and stop at the central icon. Instead, the ground and the river behind the Amitavi's Buddha was defined by several thick horizontal parallel lines, and that really served as a solid wall blocking the continuous movement of sight. Furthermore, the bottom register appears to be a closed topographical landscape, and there is no visible route directly connecting to the bridge. Therefore, it seems that the bridge functions in a Buddhological way instead of being purely visual. According to the 23rd chapter of the Lotus Sutra, this sutra is the most important one among all teachings given by Shakyamuni Buddha. If people can hear the sutra and cultivate oneself, according to the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, they will be reborn in Sukhavati and surrounded by Amitabha Buddha and various bodhisattvas as a seated figure on the lotus leaves. I consider this statement not only echoing the depiction of reborn lotus figures discussed earlier, but also serve as the key to understand the viewing experience of this deity. More specifically, hearing and practice in the Lotus Sutra can lead to the ascending to Sukhavati. With an understanding of this causal relationship, now it is the time to come back to look at the Qinzhou shrines. So the visual logic of the Qinzhou shrines is actually the visual tactic lies in the arrangement of the middle register mentioned above. The top edge of the register is defined by a Chinese-style roof, which is the basic unit form the structure of the top register, which is here. Also, the bottom edge of the middle register is represented by a linear ribbon, which constitutes the framework of the bottom register, which is here. This visual tactic creates an effect that the middle register can be viewed as either part of the top register or the bottom register. So if blocking either the top or the bottom register, the middle register can be viewed as a part of both. The remaining part still looks quite integral and harmonic. Therefore, the 8 Buddhas in the middle register could be read as the audience for both lectures depicted in the upper and bottom register. This idea can be further supported by the 2 related sutras. According to the Treasure Stupa chapter of the Lotus Sutra, because the many Buddhas will come and sit to listen to the lecture on the 8 directions, Shakyamuni created and transformed 200 trillion paradises for the Buddhas to sit. The number of 8 Buddhas depicted here echoes the 8 directions mentioned in the sutra. Moreover, the many Buddhas were listening to the lecture while seated in the suspending paradises created by Shakyamuni. So in this sense, when viewing the middle and bottom register as a whole, on a flat surface, it is reasonable to place the audience above the lecturing thing. In the longer Sukhativihara Sutra, the audience actually gathered under the 7 treasure flower hall to listen to the teaching of the Amitayus. From this perspective, if we temporarily remove the bottom register, the 8 Buddhas in the middle register in fact sits under a roof, here as you can see, in a lecture hall to listen to the teaching of the Amitayus Buddha. Therefore, I would like to argue that the back relief of the Qinzhou shrine is essentially similar as the Wanfosi stele, because from a structuralist perspective, they both consist of 3 key units: the representation of Sukhavati, the representation or transformation of the Lotus Sutra, and a bridge to connect them. For the Wanfosi stele, the direct presence of bridge together with visual strategy of converging perspective serve as the means to demonstrate the causal relationship between cultivating oneself according to the teaching of the Lotus Sutra and ascending to Sukhavati, the Western Pure Land. Similarly, for the Qinzhou shrine, I think the middle register functions the same way as the bridge on the stele. I have demonstrated that the 8 Buddhas in the middle ground serve as the audience for both lectures represented in the upper and bottom register of the relief. To be more specific, the 8 Buddhas represent the many Buddhas sitting in the suspending paradises while listening to the teaching of Shakyamuni as described in the Treasure Stupa chapter of the Lotus Sutra. Moreover, the Lotus Sutra is actually a written record of the oral sermons given by Shakyamuni, which means the people who read the Lotus Sutra are actually audience of Shakyamuni's lecture. So here I need to make it clear that all Buddhist sutras, they were not written by the historical Buddha himself. It was a recollection, or it was a written down record of the oral lectures that the historical Buddha's disciples, they believe to be delivered by the Buddha. So, in that sense, the 8 Buddha in the middle register represent the practitioners who read the Lotus Sutra and practice Buddhism under the instruction of the Lotus Sutra. Then the 8 Buddhas are simultaneously the audience of Amitao's lecture taken place at Sukhavati, the Western Pure Land. So the key is the polysemy here embodies through the transcendent identities of the audience Buddha on the middle register again express the causal relationships between hearing and practicing the Lotus Sutra and answering to Sukhavati. In other words, it is through becoming the audience of Shakyamuni and the Lotus Sutra, the practitioners becomes the audience of Amitaois and attain rebirth in Sukhavati. I consider it an important Buddhist movement to connect Pure Land belief and the teaching of Lotus Sutra in 5th century China, as we have read a lot of Buddhist texts emphasizing the connection between the two. So I will stop here, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. A big thank you to our first speaker for getting us to think critically about these miniature bronze shrines and encouraging us to not just only look at the front of the shrine, but also at the back of the shrine, because there are lots of interesting stories that one can find. So our second speaker is Professor Elena Cavillo from the University of Richmond. She is an associate professor of art history at the University of Richmond in Virginia, US. And she's just completing a book on the artist that she's going to be speaking to us about today, Giulio Clovio and the challenges of judgment. So please join me in welcoming Professor Cavillo.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers for including me in today's and yesterday's wonderful talks, and also the Courtauld Institute for hosting this. Okay. In the proem to his paraphrases, the 7 penitential Psalms of David, the 16th century polymath Pietro Aretino writes that beguilement was at the heart of the biblical King David's sins of adultery and murder, likening the object of his desire, Bathsheba, to a beautiful idol, quote, which at first sight had impressed itself in his breast, so much so that he adored the new image, so inflamed with desire and love was he with her that he lost his judgment. Judgment, or the danger posed by a lack of it, I've argued previously, is the central theme of the 16th century miniaturist Giulio Clovio's Illuminations, introducing a reading of the penitential Psalms in the Book of Hours that he made for his young patron, Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, between 1538 and 1546, now in the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York. In the past, my discussion of these pages concerned the iconographic and visual sources that establish this focus on judgment, good and bad. This morning, I want to return to these spectacular pages, measuring 17 by 11 centimeters, to address another element that I argue catalyzed the interpretive and devotional labor required by them, specifically, and by the reading and viewing of the Farnese Hours and another illuminated manuscript in the Sir John Soane Museum more generally. Clovio's use of scale, especially dramatic changes in scale, seems to have been designed to guide the viewer's affective and hermeneutic experience, signaling the need for thought or judgment, with visual mechanisms that engaged one's sense of perspective and difference. For the 16th century Italian viewer and collector, the contrapposto, or contrasting position between what is physically very small and its grand or monumental appearance, in both style and composition, was a source of delight and marvelment. Several of Clovio's peers attest to this, as the art historian Webster Smith noted more than 50 years ago. But pleasure was only part of the point. Viewing these works required skill, from the use of proportional reasoning to understand the miniature's application of mathematical linear perspective, to the reserve of knowledge about the relative sizes of the real objects reproduced and embedded in Clovio's miniatures, including antique and contemporary cameos, medals, paintings, and sculptures, as I've recently argued. And I should say here that when I say real, I'm not limiting myself to specific objects that existed, but rather their general and very collectible type. A small cameo or a life-size sculpture or a typical easel painting. In general, objects that the embodied artist experienced in the households of his patrons. Part of the delight that his works provided them, his patrons, then derived from their recognition of their possessions, which, like Clovio's paintings, incorporated both the minute and the monumental. However, this recognition is a relatively superficial aspect of the experience of Clovio's works, though not without heuristic value. These collections of Cardinal Marino Grimani, Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, and their counterparts, like the works of art inspired by them, also continually challenge the viewer's sense of scale in their experience of them. Clovio's miniatures for these patrons exercise their ability to judge the difference between what they expected and what they saw before them, usually what they held before them. According to Giorgio Vasari, Clovio's first works in Italy, and thus his first works for Marino Grimani, were very small pen drawings after their collection of antique medals, made with, quote, extreme, almost incredible diligence, end quote. Almost all of Vasari's language addressing either size or scale evokes a sense of the marvelous. These drawings are either lost or no longer attributable to Clovio, but a later project, which I'm showing here, by Battista Franco and Enea Vico, give us a good sense of what they probably looked like. And here I'm showing you one sheet of the entire series of engravings made from drawings on the left, of which you can see one of them on the right. That Clovio was able to insert references to the Grimani small antiquities into his illuminated pages is interesting from the perspective of his imitative strategies and his patrons' affection for their own collections, but his incorporation of these objects is much more sophisticated than simple reproduction of something in a similar size. Rather, these miniature medals and cameos almost always appear beside representations of things that are in life much larger in size, marking shifts in scale and employing the rhetorical device of contrapposto to signal difference and prompt the viewer to consider or reconsider what he or she understands and knows. In this case, the contrapposto not only occurs within the work, as David Summers observed many years ago, but also within the mind of the spectator, who would have expected to recall both the size of the particular monument and the type of monument or event, such as a battle, to which Clovio referred in his works. The exercise of recalling the monumental frescoes of the Sala di Costantino on one side, an easel painting or a print, on the other, for Clovio's central compositions, framed as pendants by minuscule copies of life-size sculptures, challenges the reader's phenomenological sense of space by disrupting the illusion of sharing space with the king, though ultimately this is exactly the position that the reader should assume as he begins the reading of the King's Laments. This use of scale to recognize difference here is akin to the cognitive work demanded by the typological relationships in the Book of Hours, such as the analogy between the circumcision and the baptism of Christ, or that between the fall of man and the adoration of the shepherds. In these cases, the central images share the same scale, so other elements in the framework support and supplement the interpretive work. Here, the contrast between the interior setting of the circumcision and the natural setting of the baptism, between the age of the priest and the young Christ child, or between the beauty of the male nudes on the right and the women witnessing the circumcision, signal the difference between the ritual of the old covenant under the law and the new covenant of grace with baptism. In this other set of facing pages, the night scene of the adoration of the shepherds can be compared to the daytime of the temptation. But the framework also plays an important role in its emphasis of flesh. Flesh as the vehicle for original sin and as the means for the redemption in the incarnate Christ. In the folios for the penitential psalms, the difference in scale between King David and the battle in which Bathsheba's husband Uriah dies catalyzes the same interpretive work as the other contrapposti just noted. At first glance, most of the figures in the folios for the penitential psalms seem to be in similar scale. The protagonist, King David, has a similar proportional relationship with his younger self on the left folio and with the object of his desire, Bathsheba, framing or enclosing him on the right folio. As we can see, both derive from antique sculpture models whose identities also center on the theme of judgment. Paris's catastrophic judgment initiating the Trojan War, and a ridiculous origin story, I'm not joking here, I mean I am, but origin story about a buttocks beauty contest in the case of the Venus. The dramatic shift in scale between the portrayal of King David in the battle scene, noted by Vasari, disrupts our sense of these relationships. Clovio's biography wrote, Vasari, quote, "Before the penitential psalms is a battle in which Uriah the Hittite, by the command of King David, dies, where there are horses and people wounded and dead, which is miraculous," end quote. Despite the painting of the nude Bathsheba and the penitent King David, Vasari focuses on the scene that requires virtuosic design and perspective. We know from preparatory drawings made for another page that Clovio scaled down his work for the Farnese hours. And this is a relatively correct relationship between the preparatory drawing and the eventual miniature. Given the minuscule size of the manuscript, this seems entirely practical, particularly when the proportional relationships are especially important to the viewing of the subject, though these are almost always consistent in a consistent scale to support the illusionism of that perspective. So this is one good example. Vasari praises these types of scenes for their ability to evoke the grand despite their size. Commenting on the pages bearing the Carnival Festival in Testaccio, Vasari commends both the artist's hand and the viewer's eye, suggesting that there is skill involved in both the making and the viewing of the works. For the penitential psalm pages, the viewer's skill lies in recognizing the correlation between the differences in scale and the moral states of King David, between his act of penance and his most grievous sin. Of the 13 sets of facing pages that introduce either the hours of the Little Office of the Virgin or other sets of devotional prayers, such as the penitential psalms, only the set preceding the hours of the Holy Spirit show a similar difference in scale represented in the central scenes. So 2 of 13. The theme of these pages centers on communication and understanding, from the loss of one language and division of mankind in the ideological story of the Tower of Babel in the Old Testament book Genesis, to the acquisition of languages and the unification of peoples in Christian faith represented by the Pentecost or descent of the Holy Spirit. The Tower of Babel provides artists an especially good opportunity to demonstrate their command of scale. From a negative perspective, it is a morality tale about man's ambition and divine punishment for striving to equal God. But there is an interesting parallel, I would argue, between the unifying system of mathematic proportions, so often seen in these images, and that of the single language, one could argue mathematics, enjoyed by the people of Babel. Clodio's typological pair uses scale, as he did with the penitential psalms, to signal the work that needed to be done to interpret the readings ahead. Whether we understand the death of Uriah the Hittite merely as a representation of the biblical history, or also a product of the king's conscience and memory, the change in scale for the battle using masterful perspective implies temporal and moral distance. The ferocity of the scene, epic despite its Lilliputian size, appears in stark contrast to the sensuous curves of Bathsheba's figure and languid pose of the young hero David. This contrast works in step with a different scale, prompting the viewer to think typologically, contrasting the sin and penitence of the king. The visual delight offered to the viewer from the nudes and the recognition of their sources in antique sculpture, to the intricate and dramatic battle scene attracts and holds the viewer's attention, while these contrapposti between figures and between scales initiates the devotional labor required of the following penitential psalms. Clodio's inventions, figural and perspectival, require different types of knowledge, from connoisseurial to mathematic. That knowledge, in general, establishes a disposition in the reader, a mindset prepared for a productive reading of the sacred poetry and for personal penance. As noted at the beginning of this paper, Clodio's ability to move between both size and scale probably developed from his work for Cardinal Marino Grimani at the end of the second decade of the 16th century. Between 1523 and 1533, Clodio traveled and lived outside of Grimani's service, but in 1534 he returned to the cardinal's household and probably soon after began work illuminating a manuscript of his patron's commentary on St. Paul's epistle to the Romans. This work, now in Sir John Soane's museum, also provided imagery that engaged the intellectual, exegetical labor of the author and the reader. The first set of pages introduces the apostle and New Testament author through images that establish his conversion of faith, seen on the left, and spirit, from hostility to peace, from blindness to sight. Clodio's references to works in the Sistine Chapel, specifically from the Ignudi at the top of the frames to references to Raphael's designs for the tapestry cycle depicting Peter and Paul's ministries, helped to establish his patrons and his own authority in papal Rome. These artistic references and their formatting, however, also generated the type of thinking necessary for the writing and reading of a commentary, and thus served a function similar to what I've been discussing with the later Farnese hours. As a cardinal, Marino Grimani would have known the tapestry cycle referred to 3 times in Clodio's folios from seeing them regularly in Rome, but he would have also been especially familiar with the conversion of Paul composition because he owned Raphael's cartoon for it. It's now lost, so I'm showing you the tapestry on the right. Clodio's use of Raphael's design was thus all the more meaningful for his patron. What's perhaps more interesting, though, is the way in which the other 2 references, here, are included as much smaller insets. These smaller references both contextualize the conversion scene and amplify its importance. At the top and bottom, contemporary and ancient monumental figures frame the central scene and textual introduction, and at the sides, other small insets, a medal of Paul as a pastor and a portrait of Cardinal Marino Grimani, draw important parallels between the 2 authors. In the next set of illuminations, Clodio makes reference to other types of objects in the Grimani collections, the types of small antiquities that initiated his artistic education in Rome. faux cameos, engraved gems, bronze plaquettes, and medals, and a panoramic landscape that expands across the bottom of the page, paralleling the text of the Cardinal's commentary above. The presence of the smallest possible object in the Grimani collection to the most expansive landscape demands that the viewer must continuously register relative size and calibrate viewing distance. The smallest objects in real life and on the page serve to underscore the vastness of the landscape, and I would argue the temporal distance between the original text and the end author and the commentary text and its author. The very nature of the exegetical project requires a constant understanding and acknowledgement of this distance and temporal position, just as the illusionistic proximity of King David in the penitential Psalms underscored the shared position as a soul in need of penance of the biblical figure and the reader of the Book of Hours. David's poor judgment in regard to Bathsheba had terrible consequences, as I noted earlier. Clovio's figures of them and their framework reference sculptural types associated with poor judgment. The Trojan Prince Paris and the Chalcodene Venus, very lately known, both of them, by Cardinal Farnese. So he used the cardinal's ability to recognize but also covet ancient sculpture to drive home a lesson about bad judgment and use scale and the proportional reasoning necessary to understand perspective to signal other kinds of judgment. That's good judgment. The recognition of these sculptures and their meaningful disposition in the composition suggests the way in which the collecting and recording of works of art could establish a parallel between aesthetic and moral judgment. And I'm just going to conclude with these two paintings that suggest both the typological and interpretive work that changes in scale could signal. Both Parmigianino's Madonna of the Long Neck and Pontormo's Carmignano Visitation have been held as quintessentially strange but beautiful works of early Italian mannerism. The exaggerated proportions of the women and artificial coloring of the paintings are the primary hallmarks of the style, but both works also exhibit perplexing minuscule figures, which are under-theorized as yet another strange aspect of the works, even if their iconographic significance has been recognized. In the case of the Parmigianino, the figure is easily identifiable as the prophet Isaiah, and thus an Old Testament predictor of the virgin birth. His inclusion was obviously important to the artist, as these preparatory drawings indicate, though the second figure was never completed. At once absolutely modern in the 16th century, and also archaic, the hierarchy of scale at work here, because of the identity of the prophet, surely emphasizes exegesis, or prompts it, recognizing the fulfillment of the prophecy. On the most basic level, the Lilliputian Isaiah signals that the image before us is exactly that, an image, not of this world. This existence, or truth beyond our physical senses, beyond the world that the viewer inhabits, is probably the purpose of the tiny figures in Pontormo's painting, even if they also represent the women's husbands, Joseph and Zechariah. As soon as those, as soon as those figures are seen, all sense of scale is lost. They're dwarfed by the buildings, but the buildings seem like play sets in relation to the Virgin, her cousin Elizabeth, and the other two women, young and old. The contrapposto between the beauty and youth of the Virgin and the advanced age of Elizabeth and their companions, as we saw in the Farnese Hour pages, in conjunction with this striking disruption of a unified scale, catalyzed the work of interpretation and recognition that the subjects at hand are not of our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena, for that fascinating paper on these beautiful miniatures. Now I'd like to invite Elena and also Professor Lin to the table for us to have a discussion, and it's a chance for us to think about a few questions. I would love to see our first speaker as well, but he sadly can't join us, but I'm sure you'll have questions for Elena, and also.
But I just wanted to reflect on the two papers a little bit before we sort of jump into the Q&A. And I really found it striking that both speakers, both papers, take us back and forth between different scales. I mean, they're working with these beautiful bronze miniatures, painted miniatures, and yet you also sort of get us to move outside of the world of these miniatures and help us think about different scales. And then also help us to also think about, I guess, the uses, the patrons, the different communities that are involved in making, but also in using these objects. And it made me sort of also think about what do these objects themselves, what are the kind of traces, the material evidence that we might see of use. And I'm wondering if that's something that we can also reflect a little bit about to start us off in our question and answer session.
So the two manuscripts that I talked about today were, there was very little access to them. The second one, which is now in London, was in some ways, I mean, it's obviously not a first draft, it's not a draft, it's a precious object, but it was supplanted by a second version. And so that relegated it, I think, to a certain extent to a kind of family possession. It stayed in the Grimani family until the 18th century and then was purchased by a British diplomat in the 18th century and came to London in Sir John Soane's collection. So there's not a lot of evidence that it had much use or access. The Farnese Hours had almost a kind of conflicting use. It very quickly became a monument of art in Rome. And even though it was in a private collection, it was regularly visited. How much it was used as a personal devotional object is hard to tell. It was in the miniaturist collection, in the household, his entire life. And in fact, there's this very sad letter in which the head of the cardinal's household says, "We've got to take it away from him. He's too old, he's going to drop it." And he doesn't want to let it go. So how much it was used devotionally is hard to tell. I think certainly one of the most interesting facts about the Farnese Hours is that the cardinal, in his will, identified 3 aspects of his collection that could never leave Rome. One was his collection of antiquities, the other was his library, and the third was the Farnese Hours of all of the possessions. And so it was understood to be an important monument, even in its own period of its making.
Thank you for that sharing. I wonder if you have any questions for both our speakers.
Thank you. And I guess I have a question that connects Elena's paper with Wenjie's talk yesterday. And to my understanding, the kind of work you study both sort of require or invited the kind of viewing that connects a chain of imagery of varying sizes, which are not necessarily sort of smoothly continuous, but there's a bit of a jump in the scale of sizes. Like the pagoda miniatures that I remember is like 1/8, so sometimes, yeah. And then when I'm thinking about the miniatures like this big, right? But if it is viewed in scenarios like Villa, is that why it's called the Farnese miniature that was in Villa Farnese?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of
Oh, I mean, I assume it will be viewed in a Renaissance setting originally, and surrounded by full-scale sculptural paintings.
Probably.
Yeah, probably. But so it's and then again similarly, if you have a full scale statue here, the jump of scale is also like what the last two paintings by Courtauld and Parmigiano you showed us. It's not such a smooth perspectival relationship, but yeah, I guess that's how would you think about the chain of imagery and or.
No, I think you should start because when I heard your paper yesterday, I thought that it really resonated with my thinking about the skills that both the viewer and the artist-architect employ.
Well, what I learned about from your talking, and I think it's very much true that the skill is also the kind of visual language as well. So it's a way of expressing some ideas as well. So, and then so I think very true in your paper that the skill differences does kind of trigger the different kind of interpretation, right? So, and then but that interpretation probably is not only about the skill, but from the scale there's a lot greater implications. So from the perspective, for example, from the viewing, the viewer, the relation between the viewers and the subject viewing, or object viewing. So I think there's a lot of things will kind of be triggered after you realize there's such a the scale difference. The scale is a way of saying something. It's a way of expression as well. I think, and in Buddhist art, and then the context of my talk yesterday, and I'm sure if you go, probably more so in Buddhist art, when you walk into a temple, oftentimes you'll realize the Buddha is very large, right? And the Bodhisattva is going to be still smaller, and then the donor image is going to be the smallest one, right? And then you put yourself in there, and you realize you actually have another scale. So you have you are in this kind of the landscape of different scales, right? So and then that will kind of begin to trigger some of your desire to interpret what's going on, right? And then I think the scale of difference, one way to think about that is disruption, right? So I think very much, this Wenjie's question is it's about disruption. When you have that scale difference, and then you begin to feel one is uncomfortable, if that's gigantic, and then you feel overwhelmed. Right. So, and then if that's miniature, you begin to feel like you can't really fit in the world. So you will begin to kind of try to kind of see this miniature from different angles, but you won't. So there's a lot of disruptions. But yesterday, what I want to present is that the disruptions oftentimes is the way of we will go about the scale difference. But is it possible that we can think about that as adaptive, right? When you see something that has scale gradation, right? It's very clear that there's a grade 1 to grade 10, and then they are, all different kind of scales, but in kind of a general relationship. There's a lot of examples in China. For example, one example would be the bronze vessels for funerary purposes, and then if the deceased is a king, then the number will be 9. With the 9 bronzes in there, and then they will be displayed in the sequence from the smallest one to the largest one. So it has to be in some kind of proportional, differences, but it has to be some kind of relationship as well. So this is quite, it really has been done a lot throughout the history of Chinese art. And a lot of times I was really puzzled how people did it. How can they scale up in such a subtle and precise way? But regardless, I think there's an intention to do that. So yesterday in my talk, I really want to kind of explore the possibility, the scale relationship that we have with this world. A lot of times it's not about disruption. A lot of times it's about what's going on and how can we adapt to that and understand the meaning of the scale, right? So I guess that's what I will say.
Yes, we have a question over there.
Hi, thank you for your papers. Another link I sort of thought of between the two is that there's a particular kind of relationship that both you were describing between the miniature or the small object and its bigger model. So in both cases, it seems like there's a preservation or a clear signal of that relationship. So in the case of the architecture that you showed, there's this very careful, formal relationship between the small architectural models and the big real buildings. And you described even the modularity, this concern that that's a very clear purpose of creating that link between the big thing and the small thing. And similarly, I noticed in the frames of some of the manuscripts you showed, they're clearly signaling that the model is sculpture, right? It's monochromatic. They're not trying to, in many cases, they're trying to show off the fact that the archetypes were sculpture. So I'm sort of thinking about why is that? Why signal that relationship? What kind of happens? What affordances are there in sort of preserving the awareness of that change from big to small? If that makes sense.
I think in the case of Clovio's works, there was what I said was slightly superficial sort of pleasure in recognizing one's possessions. The cardinal was actively trying to acquire as many sculptures as possible. The Calavigine Venus he did eventually acquire. But I think it has to do with a demonstration also of skill, that a painter can produce an image like sculpture or a sculptural image. It is also, in terms of the meaning, these ancient sculptures were also idols, right? And this is about turning your attention from the idol. You can master it, you can enjoy it, but ultimately you turn your attention from the idol to the non-material. What's eventually coming are the devotional texts that you'll be reading. And it's a different, I've written about it before, so I didn't want to say too much, but the sculpture, to a certain extent, it provoked a certain kind of lust. It put the reader in a position of wanting something that it shouldn't, and then needing to atone for that sin.
Is then making it small something about possession?
I think, yes, the people have certainly talked about scale that way. I think that's certainly part of it, but I also think it's about a demonstration of virtuosic talent and perspective. That Clovio, he did produce works that had no frames, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this. The works that have no frames are copies of Michelangelo. There's nothing in the work inherently, there's nothing organically in the work that would suggest that it wasn't big or small, right? You can't tell by looking at an image of it. But when you look at the miniatures that have the frameworks with the smaller things in it, then that sets up a relational viewing that never lets you forget that what you're looking at is quite small.
Yeah, and then about the architectural model and then the real thing, right? So the model, you build a model first, and then you build the whole thing, and then so what's the relationship between these two things? So ontologically they are different, right? So if they are the same thing, then you won't have each of the model. And a lot of times in the model, the model will predict what will happen. So it always has this kind of potential right there, right? So eventually it's gonna realize. But of course there are models that were never realized. So they stay in that state of being right there. So it has that potential, but it's not really realized. So there's a lot of times that we talk. That's how we talk about the model and the real architecture. The model always has that kind of it contains that ideas and then being condensed in there. So you try to kind of from there you try to explore the different kind of possibilities. Whereas when you have the building right there, full scale, then you lose all this kind of possibility to make a mistake, for example, right? So, but at the same time, I think the one thing very important is how this model can be the agent. What's the agency of the model, right? So how the model is actually kind of factored, shape the ways in which you build and you feel. Right, so I think that's kind of the way I want to tease out, with my last example. A lot of people will talk about model, but eventually you're thinking about the real thing. So how this real thing, you can understand that from looking at this. But my point is that when you look at that real thing, how this kind of looking and understanding and toying will be part of that experience that eventually being built. right? So that's kind of the stuff I really want to. I feel that's something that's missing. And when you look at the small miniature, the kind of joy, right? And then, but then you build that into a real thing, and then you forgot about that. But I think in the case of my study, I feel that the emperor actually want to have that enjoyment that he had with the miniature, and then eventually build into the building. So that's the reason why I say the real building is actually a scale up of the miniature.
Yes, so then there's a kind of inversion between the two things you're talking about, because you're saying that the model, the small, actually has priority, as opposed to the sculpture in your case has priority, right? And it's being translated into small. So there's a kind of inversion of the scale transformation. That's right.
Yeah, although I think Clovio would argue that the sculpture shouldn't have priority. And that the cardinal should stop coveting these sculptures so much, also the real women that were in his life, and that he should start reading the penitential psalms. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions, or do we have time for more questions? Wrap up. Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you to all our speakers today, and thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back and to this panel, which has a wonderful set of papers dealing with the question of scale and miniaturization from a different angle. And this panel is called or titled When the Overlooked Looms Large. My name is Suzanne Babai. I'm a professor of the arts of Iran and Islam at the Courtauld. I've enjoyed the papers I have heard thus far, and I apologize for those whom I have missed. It sounds like a really wonderfully cohesive conference, and congratulations to organizers of this conference. So I have the task of introducing each speaker and then starting the conversation and helping us to have actually a conversation at the end. The speakers, if I may, I'd like to introduce them beforehand, and then they will come one after the other, I hope. The second talk is by Yizhou Wang. Apologies if I do not pronounce your name properly. From Hong Kong Baptist University. Her talk is titled Intimate Enchantment, Scale and Affect of Fans in Ming-Qing Literary and Visual Culture. Yizhou is a research assistant professor at the Academy of Visual Arts of the Hong Kong Baptist University, and she lectures widely on Chinese art history at the Chinese University of Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you. I'm so glad that Vanessa actually also discusses Chinese fans, but more focusing on the Xinwuziri Chinese fans for export purposes. And in my talk, Intimate Enchantment, Scale and Effect of Fans in Ming-Qing Literary and Visual Culture, I will examine another category of Chinese fans, mostly for domestic Chinese audiences. The handmade portable fans in pre-modern China were not merely designed or used to bring a cool breeze to reduce heat in a warm environment. They were intimate objects carried on the body and fashioned accessories for cultural and gendered expressions. They were elegant gifts for the exchange of feelings and information. On the fans, there are often paintings with calligraphy inscriptions. In current scholarship, painted fans have been mostly treated and studied as paintings or fan paintings. The two photos on the slide demonstrate that the painted fans have been removed from the original fan frames or ribs and are remounted as album leaves, now in museum collections. Painted fans are remounted due to the conservation purposes as they are fragile, but such reframing might let us forget how a fan was used in original spatial and social contexts. My approach here is I treat painted fans or fan paintings as objects. Unlike paintings hung on the walls or placed in the storage, they are handled and waved by people in everyday life. They are once opened and then closed. They are traveling with people to different places and social spaces, such as banquets and other social gatherings. Fan can also be used at more private environments, such as inner quarters and private gardens. In this paper, I will explore how the changing scale of fans played an essential role in shaping affective and intimate experiences in the Ming Dynasty and also early Qing period, which is early modern China. By comparing with the type of circular fans, I have props for today. I have to apologize that the fans I bring actually are not the Ming Dynasty or Qing Dynasty fans. They are just the contemporary variations. But the general form is actually the same. So circular fans, if that's just give you a little idea. So by comparing with the type of circular fans, I argue that folding fans, it's quite ugly, I have to say. Folding fans served as small and effective messengers for the exchange of intimate information, being particularly useful to express and strengthen passionate and or illicit love. And I will show how scale matters and the associated gender politics. And I use the evidence of both literary and visual materials to support my arguments. There are two main formats of fans in pre-modern China. So one is actually has a longer tradition, that's circular fan. During the Ming Dynasty, there was a transition in the fashion of fan culture. So, folding fans became popularized. And an important idea in terms of scale that is fundamental to my argument is, a folding fan is really easy to carry and hide in pockets or sleeves. But the circular fan, you just have to hold it. It's just too big. So such scale change provides a condition for the role of folding fans as small and effective messengers in intimate relationships. Well, folding fans are quite universal and common in early modern world, especially in Europe and East Asia. However, we need to pay attention to an important transition in Ming China, as I just mentioned, in fan production and consumption. During the Ming Dynasty, circular fans were still used. However, there was an emerging popularity of folding fans. Folding fans were not originated in China, but in Japan. Before the Ming Dynasty, folding fans were mainly exotic objects imported from Japan. During the Ming Dynasty, Chinese people still imported folding fans from Japan, but the domestic production of folding fans also emerged in China. And there were some famous brands, for example, the Sichuan fan, it was quite famous. The changing fashion from circular fans to folding fans was initiated by Ming emperors and then spread at Ming court. Outside the court, at the beginning, folding fans were not used by everyone. It was the men, the male, who used them in daily life first. And then it was the prostitutes or courtesans who led the fashion of using fans among women. Thus, the gentry class followed up and started to use folding fans. It shows a social and gender hierarchy in the fan material culture. As scale is an important factor in my study, let's have a look at the size of the handheld folding fan in Ming Dynasty. So I examined the database and the collections in museums. And in most cases, the height or length of a folding fan is between 15 and 22 centimeters, and the width is very tiny, about like 2 to 3 centimeters. But once you open it, the width extends to 40 to 56 centimeters. There are constant changes in size and scale during the movement of opening and closing a fan. Evidenced by the records written by male literati, Ming Dynasty people, including the emperors, were impressed and amazed by the small body, especially when it was folded. The late Ming scholar Wen Zhengheng wrote with excitement, when being folded, the fan has the breadth of only 2 fingers. When describing the scale of a folding fan in the closing state, to demonstrate its smallness, Wen Zhengheng used his own body as a measure and took his own sense of body as a standard. From the text written by the 15th century scholar Lu Rong, the Ming Yongle emperor was very fond of folding fans because they were, I just quote, because they are easy to open and close, unquote. In addition to the magical mechanism that folding fans presented to the Ming Chinese audiences, folding fans with exquisite paintings and calligraphy in well-crafted frames were valued and also evaluated in people's social life as social performance. The early Qing literatus Zhang Chao wrote, examining the fan held in one's hand provides adequate information for recognizing to what extent the owner is genteel or vulgar, and for identifying his or her social context. I think the 17th century woodblock illustration on the right side may give you an idea how a painted folding fan could have been viewed and shown in a social gathering or banquet of men in the late Ming society. Okay, for women, fans were mirrors of their social statuses, reflecting gender and social hierarchies. Based on 15th century scholar Lu Rong's writing, quote, the women from the south all use circular fans, except that prostitutes use folding fans. In recent years, the gentry class women have also begun to use folding fans. It indicates a declining custom, unquote. And the late Ming literatus Shen Defu wrote, quote, the circular fan has a highly exquisite form, and it particularly suits the gentry class women, unquote. So, which is very clear, this kind of standard or division. Courtesans were leading the fashion of using folding fans among women in Ming Dynasty. They were also painters of folding fans. Both woodblock illustration and painting here shows how courtesans or concubines might have painted on the folding fan in the late Ming. They bought the fan ribs or frames and paper before they painted. The choice of representing this scene, featuring then painting the fan with their female bodies and hands, indicates the demand for seeing this moment of connecting their female body with the fans and adding the spirits or energy and even fragrance to the material objects that they made. As an example of folding fans painted by courtesans, here is a remounted fan painting by the late Ming courtesan artist Ma Shouzhen. So here only the pictorial part depicting orchids, bamboo, and rocks was painted by courtesan Ma Shouzhen. All the written inscriptions were left by her male clients or male admirers. The painting surface presents a social realm, and her male clients or admirers would immediately read this painting as her material embodiment or her stand-in self-portrait. I give you an example. So one of her male clients, Du Dashou, wrote, quote, that's a poem, okay, who has painted the portrait of the fragrant orchid. The tender and light swaying leaves are like the body of a beautiful woman. From time to time, the fragrant breeze emanates from within the delicate fan. I realize that such a pure breeze must be my old friend or lover, unquote. indicated by the poem, the orchid painted by Ma Shouzhen was like the body of a beautiful woman. When waving the delicate fan, and from time to time the fragrant breeze emanates, Du Dashou, he realized that the pure breeze must be his old friend or lover. The gesture of waving the fan was a sensual gesture, not only bringing the fragrant breeze, but also generating the illusion that the courtesan arrives in front of her, in front of him. The effect might not be so strong if the medium was a hanging scroll or a hand scroll. In another example, which only exists as a poem in written documents, another late Ming courtesan poet, Wang wrote a poem about a fan painting, also depicting courtesan by another courtesan for her male lover. It read, quote, borrowing a brush for drawing eyebrows for my lover, to paint a silk fan for him, he embraces the painted silk fan in his chest. When opening the fan, my lover will meet me, unquote. The fan painted by the courtesan was an intimate object that her lover would embrace in his chest, and when opening the fan, he will meet her. The courtesan's fan was a substitute of the courtesan herself, a material embodiment, and as a token of passionate love. So in late Ming fictions, here I take the well-known erotic novel Jinpingmei as an example. I find the gender politics described in the written records and presented in physical painted fans are largely consistent as shown in the novel. The general rules are only wives or concubines, the married women would use the circular fans at their home or their private gardens, while folding fans were used by men or courtesans, those kind of social persons, and they were only used by wives or courtesans to trigger an illicit love relationship that is, breaking the boundary of a marriage. So we see the division of private and public spaces, inner and outer spaces, represented in the differentiated use of circular fans and folding fans. Okay, so I just give you some examples from the novel Jinpingmei. So, in one chapter, it shows actually Pan Jinglian, the concubine, or the fifth wife of the male protagonist Xi Menqing. She often carries a white gauze circular fan. And the main functions for such kind of circular fan for the married women was mainly to make cool breeze, catch and play with butterflies. And here this illustration of to the novel actually shows the Pan Jinglian is holding a circular fan. There are some other examples about courtesans actually using folding fans in outer space. So there is one example shows that Dong Jiao'er, a musical courtesan from the Dong family bravo, she used a painted folding fan with reeds made of bamboo, speckled bamboo, to seduce a high-ranking scholar official, Cai Yun, and she succeeded in that. And she was actually paid to do so by Xi Menqing. And there are another two examples which shows the two courtesans, Li Guijie and Zheng Aiyue. They're both musical courtesans, lovers, patronized by Xi Menqing. And they very often use gold flecked folding fans, and the function actually described in the novel, it was to attract Xi Menqing, so it shows the charm of that. There are also other examples, dealing with married women, switching from the inner space to outer space, and jumping into an illicit love. So here there is one example that also about Pan Jinglian. So Chen Jingji, her secret male lover, sent a gift to Pan Jinglian, which is a sealed up gold-flecked folding fan with ribs made of bamboo. And the function was used as a secret messenger or a token of illicit love. And how does it function? You may feel curious. The thing is that we could actually, for Chinese fans, we can write poems on it. So the message is written by Chen Jingji on the fan. So that's a love poem. It wrote, quote, "When people are about, it should ever be kept in your sleeves." Okay, my sleeve is not too big. So, yeah, okay. When no one else is there, you can idly wave it to and fro. So that's in the private sphere. So in public spaces, so the secret lover said like to Pan Jingyan, you have to keep it closed, to keep the secret of the illicit love, unrevealed. And so here I felt that folding fans are really animated, portable objects that can easily shift from public spaces to private spaces through the movement of closing and opening. And such flexibility in scale leads to a world of fantasy and privacy, also as a gate to narratives and intimate imagination. Okay. Folding fans could transmit intimate information to trigger illicit and passionate love, as I showed. They can also facilitate to end such a relationship. Lin Nu'er was a 15th century courtesan in the pleasure quarters of Nanjing. She was a reputable painter. After she got married and quit her profession as a courtesan, one of her former clients or patrons still intended to contact her, which annoyed her. On the purpose of rejecting him, she painted a willow imagery on a fan and put her poem on it, sent it as a gift in response to her former patron. The poem on the fan read, quote, "In the past, the willow of the Zhang Terrace danced with her slender waist, allowing you to pull and pluck her tender twigs at will. Nowadays, she has been transferred into the painting, not permitting the easterly wind to swing her again," unquote. The willow imagery in Chinese poetry was often associated with courtesans and their soft feminine bodies. At the same time, the willow was also a symbol of parting and separation. Through this fan, Lin Nu'er rejected the former client by stating, although I was previously an entertainer and danced with my slender waist and allowed the tender twigs and my body to be pulled and plucked by the clients. Now I have been transferred into the fan painting, not permitting others to swing me, to touch me, and to change my will. So there was a transition from the past to the present in terms of courtesan status, from a courtesan to someone else's wife, and also it shows her social availability, which is not possible now. So the painted fan can be considered as material embodiment of courtesan. Her former courtesan body, symbolized by the willow imagery, was sealed up in the fan finally. And sending the fan as a gift to her former patron was a gesture of rejecting intimacy. Then why did Lin Nu'er transmit such information through a fan? Not by a hand scroll or hanging scroll. So in my opinion, as a folding fan was an object used in daily life, including social occasions such as parties and banquets, Lin Nu'er really wanted her fan to be viewed by others. So her message of becoming unavailable can be shared by other former clients powerfully. Okay. So I have shown that Ming Dynasty material culture presented by descriptions in novels and also the physical painted fans, that folding fans were used as traveling objects, sensual gifts, which bears mobility and fluidity. But actually, if we examine the folding fans in the plays of romances, I find something slightly different. So in the early Qing plays of romances, in which a fan became the central object as a thread to link the plots, a fan could also be an embodiment or metonymy of the protagonist courtesan, but it was so significant and irreplaceable that losing or damage of a courtesan's fan will lead to sorrow or an end of relationship, while the returning of a fan suggests the ultimate union of the lovers. So I give an example quickly. Ding Yaokang's play, A Fan at Westlake, 西湖上, published in 1653, the female protagonist, the courtesan Song Xiangxian, after losing her fan by the Westlake, became very upset and kept looking for it. So sorrow was there. And sometimes a fan even exercises its own agency to protect the protagonist from cutting off an intimate relationship. So this is another quite famous early Qing 传奇 play, The Peach Blossom Fan by Kong Shangren. So the peach blossom fan was really the central object as a thread linking all the plots, and it was also a token of love between the courtesan Li Xiangjun and scholar Hou Fangyu. So in one chapter, The Rejected Suit, when the courtesan Li Xiangjun was forced to accept an arranged marriage and then she refused, there was a comment from her friend Yang Wencong. She said, "How fierce! She uses her poetry fan as a murderous sword." So it really shows that peach blossom fan can be used as a powerful weapon, the kind of masculine side of it. I also compare with the folding fans with other small portable objects, and we can observe actually a similar quality that the object is inseparable from its owner and cannot be damaged. For example, hairpins. A literary scholar, Wang wrote an article, and basically she argues that in Chinese literature, a hairpin for a woman is an inalienable possession, which represents the woman's personal identity and also her womanhood. That's in literature. And in reality, actually, I found a Qing Dynasty widow, painter, poet, Tang Yifeng. She owned a jade hairpin, which was a wedding gift from her parents. But after many years, the jade hairpin was broken, and she felt so sad, and she wrote poems to lament its brokenness. And actually, it became an event of poetry exchanges. So both men and women commented on this, her poetry that is about the broken jade hairpin. And finally, very quickly, to compare with the embroidered scented sashes, another speaker will introduce more. So the scented sashes could be a token of love, and it was embroidered by the female lover and sent as a gift to her male lover. Sometimes it also reveals the secret of illicit love. So this is in the Qing Dynasty, early Qing illustration, also to the erotic novel Jinping Mei. So it shows actually one thing when so after the Pan Jinglian had an illicit love affair with the servant Qin Hong, and she sent him a scented sachet, but then it was discovered by her husband, Xi Menqing, and she was punished in the garden. And here we actually can see the little red sachet or purse that was the token of love. So these things cannot be removed or separated from the owner because it will have the kind of tragic ending. Okay, just quickly, finally, to the conclusion. So there was a fashion change in Ming Dynasty, shifting from circular fans to folding fans, and we can observe the associated gender dynamics and social hierarchies related to the change of fan format. And also the changing size and flexible scales of folding fans provided the condition that the folding fans could be messengers of intimate information, either facilitating or rejecting passionate or illicit love. And the folding fans could be regarded as material embodiment of courtesans. And when opening the fan and its folded painting, the boundary between the private and the public is mobilized. We see an animated portable object beyond a two-dimensional painting. The temporal and ephemeral process of opening and folding a fan creates a liminal space. Compared with other small objects and personal accessories such as hairpins and embroidered scented sashes, which can be considered as inalienable possessions, folding fans bear unique mobility and flexibility. However, such features might be destabilized in Chuanqi plays of romances. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for patiently staying in our second last panel of our conference titled Small Black Mirrors. We have an interdisciplinary panel of 3 papers dealing with miniaturization in the digital age to keep everybody awake after your lunch, and also to update our understanding of miniatures from contemporary perspectives. And I will follow our last and wonderful chair, Professor Suzanne Barbie, and introduce the speakers of all 3 papers at the beginning. So our first paper speaker, Matthew Westerby, is a digital research officer in the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. He received his PhD in art history and medieval studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's currently the principal investigator of a collaborative project to reimagine the makers, users, and patrons of illuminated manuscripts in late medieval and early modern Seville. His paper is titled Music in Miniature, Musical Notation and Digitized Choir Books. Our last paper will be presented by Barbara Menon. She holds a joint appointment in the departments of languages, literatures, and cultures and English at the University of Florida. She has published 6 books that I cannot list them all, but for example, the book titled Women at Work in 21st Century European Cinema by the University of Illinois Press in 2019. And she is now working on a book project tentatively titled The New Tiny, The Reinvention of Miniatures in the Digital Age. Today her presentation is titled Miniatures, Large Installations, Pandemic Curation in the Shelter in Place Scale. So now the floor is Matthew Westerby. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. The last few days have been really fantastic, and I'm really grateful to the Courtauld Institute of Arts, to Wenjie, to Yizhou and Stephen for organizing this symposium, and to the Research Farm staff for making everything happen. In my talk this afternoon, I draw from my experience as a museum professional supporting data-intensive research, creating digital assets, and collaborating with technologists, which I reflect through a digital humanist or digital medievalist lens. As such, it is a work in progress, so I really look forward to your questions and your feedback. So, musical notation developed over centuries in medieval and early modern Europe. In the 15th century, large manuscripts with heavy front boards reinforced with metal bands and bosses were ubiquitous in the choirs of Christian churches, cathedrals, and monasteries, like this one here on the left. Enlivening the square notes on either 4 or 5 staves, choir books were frequently decorated with colorful illustrations and borders. Initials opening chants that punctuated certain liturgical moments were given figural scenes. These are often called miniatures. Miniature here derives from the Latin word for red lead pigment, minium, and to color with red, miniare, as we heard yesterday from Rachel's talk. Contrary to the primary meaning of miniature in English as small in scale, miniatures in choir books can be quite large. And to convey the relative size of this choir book and this illuminated page, I have borrowed, meaning cut and pasted, a graphic of a tennis ball from the online collection for the Waterston bequest at the British Museum, which they include with their online collections to represent size. In my paper today, I explore the phenomenon of relative scale in choir book miniatures and the creative ways that illuminators used meta-musical devices to represent people and places relative to the scale of books and their musical notation. As museums continue to digitize their collections and share images online, the physical dimensions of objects like choir book miniatures become vital data points for reimagining their context in terms legible to both humans and to computers. Relative size is sometimes conveyed to online viewers in clever ways. So I will touch on a few of these creative approaches for conveying relative scale on art museum websites. Choir books were frequently cut apart and single leaves and then further to cuttings in the 19th century to extract the colorful gilded miniatures. Once cut apart, horizontal lines of musical notation may be the only surviving evidence for the original size of the lost parent manuscript. And to be clear, in this slide, I have a choir book cover at the left, which is unrelated to the single leaf and the cutting. It is there simply to illustrate the relation of the part to the whole. When cuttings from choir books are digitized and presented online, and especially with deep zooming image viewers, the relative scale of these cuttings is even further decontextualized. Illuminators sometimes created images of choir books within choir books to identify people and places. One of them is the painter and illuminator Nicolas Gomez, active in Seville in the late 15th century. 8 miniatures by Gomez survive as cuttings at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, including this initial T and I. The initial I at the right here shows a biblical king, probably David or Saul, embracing the letter as if holding it up and manifesting the authority of the text. Sections of square notes on red staves remain on either side of this initial, and this is the only cutting of this group that was not trimmed all the way to the edges of the gold leaf in the 19th century. A larger and more ornate initial T at left here depicts a group of Geronimite friars in brown cowls singing from a choir book on a lectern, placed just to the right of an altar that bears a diptych of Saints Peter and Paul. Below the altar, a bent-over man holds one hand into a stream of water emerging from a lion-headed spout at the altar's base. This iconography is challenging to interpret, especially removed from the context of the choir book. Who is this bearded man, and why is he shown in the same space as these friars? Although I have studied this miniature in person with a magnifying glass and collaborated with colleagues in scientific research and conservation, which I will return to later, the incredibly detailed deep zoom image on the National Gallery's website is often the best tool available for close looking. Zooming into this image online to its full extent, and this is around 10,000 pixels, we see a whole lot more. The right page of the choir book in the miniature with musical notation in black approximates a specific chant which helps to interpret this imagery painted by Nicolas Gomez. A single red initial opens 2 lines of music that approximate the chant Terribilis est locus ista, or translated as how awesome is this place. And I guess it's pretty big, but here's that initial, that red initial. This was sung at the dedication of a church. So in liturgical context, the bent-over man can be read as one of the patron saints of the monastery where this book was used and to whom the church would have been dedicated. So performing and participating in the dedication to their own church. One of the friars points at the lines of music with 2 fingers while lifting the parchment to turn the page. In this way, Gomez depicts the relative size of this choir book in relation to the friars' hands and to their faces. Further, the horizontal black lines and the dots of the notation are another metric for relationships of scale and for the sensuous time-based experience of turning the pages of the choir book as the dedication mass progressed. So in short, this deep zoom view reveals something new, but at the same time, web viewers are left with no framework to understand the relative size of this miniature. So, zooming out and closing the image viewer box, we can scroll down the page and find the overall dimensions of this cutting. The data here in centimeters and inches. And this is unstructured data in that it's not machine readable. It's for a human reader to read on the web. So this measurement gives the size of the cutting as the object. It pertains to the 19th century hand that cut away the surrounding parchment and transformed the initial into a discrete and displayable object. The zooming image and the museum tombstone information, as I'm calling this, are standard for collection web pages. But what other tools or interfaces can be imagined? From a codicological perspective, the most vital measurement to take from this cutting is the individual line height. In this case, each line is about 23 to 24 millimeters tall, and this would have been consistent through all the musical notation in this choir book. The full height of this meta choir book painted by Gomez fits within one of these lines, or even more, just the size of a single square note, like left here. The ruling, the red ink, and the black notes were laid out on the parchment before the illuminator began the miniatures. And as such, the ruling and the notation were already there for the artist to play with or to mirror. Zooming in again, now with red lines overlaying the music, 4 ladybugs standing side to side would approximate the 23 millimeter line height. In this scenario, the black dots of meta-music notation are each about the size of one spot on a ladybug's back. And I did this experimentally, and then I discovered that Vasari also used ants as a reference of scale, in, which we heard this morning from Elena. So I felt a little better about it.
I like ladybugs.
Insects would probably not go into full-scale production as a graphical representation for relative size of artworks, like the tennis ball for the British Museum website, but I give this example of an overlay just to think about the value of these graphics for anyone who uses zoomable images of museum objects. Many more people will view this image as a surrogate for the original than will see the choir book cutting in person. This problem of conveying the physical properties of books and medieval manuscripts in particular is taken up by digital humanists and digital medievalists. In the chapter More True and Better, the digital book and its frameworks of understanding, in the book Perceptions of Medieval Manuscripts, Elaine Treherne comments on the value of frameworks for size and scale. Quoting Treherne, perspective, voluminousness, materiality, these things matter, and without clear reference points, elements of the book disappear before our eyes in a digital world where scale, heft, and space around the image are not provided. Scale, approximate but consistent, would be as simple a matter of providing 1 or 2 images at the front of the book, which included an adult human hand, unquote. The presence of human hands in relation to the choir book is exactly what Nicolas Gomez painted into his miniature. And I'll also note that Rachel yesterday demonstrated this in her talk by putting photographs of her hands in front of the objects that she studied, which I will not call miniatures. Some collections include a physical ruler and color key, like the Philadelphia Free Museum, for this choir book cutting of an initial C enclosing a choir of Franciscan friars. In this case, a measurement can be taken from the image as data. Another convention for online image viewers is the thumbnail sidebar right here, a kind of content display of a visual index. And here I have selected a thumbnail and zoomed in to a miniature with another metamusical initial A, in this case with a group of Olivetan monks. For these miniatures, the horizontal lines of musical notation in choir books, within choir books, establishes grids that enabled their original embodied users, monks, friars, nuns, and so on, to imagine their voices in relationship to real-world spaces like chapels and choirs, and within the spiritual hermeneutic of vocalizing sacred music in communal performance. So my goal with this split-screen image here is to contrast the object-based ruler and thumbnail image viewer with the perceptual and relational experience of musical notation. Now, getting a little more technical, deep zoom image viewers on museum websites frequently implement a set of technical specifications called the International Image Interoperability Framework, or IIIF. And perhaps you've seen this colorful logo on websites. When a user clicks to zoom, the IIIF compatible image viewer refers to scaled sets of image tiles called a pyramid. Although I have to say, after yesterday's keynote from Professor Lin, I'm thinking of this more as a pavilion at the moment. So this conceptual view of a deep zoom with image tiles for Rembrandt's Night Watch illustrates how a user might maneuver through these tiles. This process of shuffling between tiles and states unfolds computationally in the background of your web browser. Processing images like this with lines and grids, of course, has a long history. Rasterization of digital images is one example, named for the tool designed to regulate musical notation after the Middle Ages. So this rastrum, from the Latin word for rake, is a pen with 5 tips, essentially. Unlike the 15th century choir books, which I started with, which were pricked along the edges of the parchment with lines traced across the pages with a quill, the rastrum drew 5 staves at once. I discovered this webpage about writing music by hand, created by Michael Berger, which describes the rastrum with a digital text overlaying a raster or bitmap image of a parchment scroll, which is manipulated. Here, a single line of pixels is extended downwards, further decorated with a colorful initial A. This scale of repetition calls back to musical notation and the remediation of tools and processes. Other tools and mediations extended the grid of notation while preserving its book-boundedness. A woven lectern cover made in 1503 plays with the scale of music notation in, I think, a similar vein as Nicolas Gomez's initial T. This woven choir book by Maestro Juan Tedesco encodes a grid of 16 warps to an inch, remarkably similar to a bitmap image. This 4-line stave curves inwards as they would be perceived from the viewpoint of an open book. Designs later were encoded in patterns on punch cards and joined together and fit to a loom with the jacquard loom in the 19th century. These punch cards would determine the movements of mechanized hooks that lifted individual threads under which a worker shuttled a thread back and forth. Images woven in fabric were perfected later in the 19th century, especially in Lyon, France, exemplified in woven prayer books, different from this one, but conceptually related. And these are considered to be the precursors of computer-generated images. The perceptual disconnection from pixel dimensions to physical dimensions is a problem that has incited experiments on museum websites since the early 2000s. The San Diego Museum of Art's online catalog offered a feature to web users powered by Netscape Navigator, in this case, to click and see how big is it, which placed a scaled image in reference to a ruler with a cutout figure from what I believe is a manuscript in their collection, but I couldn't place that. A similar feature is used today on the website for the Van Gogh Museum. Between the zoom and the download buttons, users can click a ruler, which gives you Vincent for scale. Displaying a scaled image of Van Gogh's painting next to a cutout or a silhouette of his figure is somewhat more effective within this specialized collection in that the dimensions of the canvases bear some kind of tangible relationship to the artist who painted them. One more. The structure and presentation of data about dimensions also offers rare moments of creativity and imagination with museum website development. The digital design company CogApp pushed this to its tongue-in-cheek apex in a Hack Day event for the Art Institute of Chicago. Neil Hawkins explored the banana for scale as a button for users to toggle on and off. The image viewer pulls structured data about artwork dimensions from the museum's artwork data endpoint, which is something more or less hidden to the average web user. He wrote a script that runs when an artwork page is loaded in the user's browser, which fetches and parses out the dimension data, and then presents this button. In a blog post describing this experiment, Neil turns to other resources for scalable vector graphics to represent almost any kind of relational object. And this was my source for the ladybug scale that I introduced earlier. The potential for these web interfaces is the creativity of translating across visual images and structured data towards a more human-centered design. However, computational approaches can also extend the scope far beyond the human scale. And towards a conclusion, I will expand the scope outwards and then back again. So as part of my research on 15th century illuminated choir books from Seville, I collaborated with National Gallery of Art research scientists Roxanne Radpour and John Delaney and paper conservator Michel Faccini to analyze mixtures and layers of pigments applied in miniatures. The tool they developed for these analyses uses reflectance imaging spectroscopy, captured as full spectrum sensor data, so visual spectrum and then way beyond that as well. I was surprised to learn that the software which processes the sensor data is exactly the same application used for remote sensing from satellites orbiting Earth. So in other words, the computer does not know the scale of distance for the light reflected. It's not relevant. In our case, two lights placed at the sides of the book act as the light source, and here's one of them. With the sensor placed just a few feet away from the choir book leaf, about the same distance as the original users of the choir book at Seville Cathedral. The computer analyzes spectral angles to match each signature with a known pigment or dye, or to just raw parchment. Colorized images like these pigment maps, are then produced for human consumption of the results. So this shows the 20 classes of spectral signatures which this model is capable of analyzing. As you'll notice, the musical notation is not included in this study. It's yet again trimmed away, like the cuttings that were remade for display. However, the red vermilion used for the horizontal lines of musical staves was still detected. You can see that just cutting across in two places. The findings, generated from a computational method without a reference for scale, are then compared to micrographs back in the familiar human optical space. Our team was most interested in the complex layers of red pigments that Nicolas Gomez used in the robes of biblical figures like King David, where red lead is applied along with vermilion, red lake, and red ochre. And this is a relatively tedious process for choir book illumination, and one that stands out in Gomez's miniatures compared to the other illuminators who contributed to these large series of choir books. Back in the human optical range, micrographs include scale bars, like the top row here, which is 5 millimeters a piece. And as I was wrapping this up, I realized that's about the same as the width of one ladybug. And I didn't mean to recall the ladybug so much, but there it is. So from the original religious users of choir books to the removal and display of miniatures as cuttings, as objects to be collected, and then to the deep zoom features of museum and library websites, the place of musical notation continues to shift in the background. As museums adapt 3D models and augmented reality experiences more routinely to display facsimiles of collections, physical scale will be more routinely encoded within these digitizations as structured data. Thinking optimistically, I hope that experimentation and collaboration across subject experts, art historians, technologists, and web designers can lead to more generous interfaces, which so often are perceptual mirrors of their intended users. Like the initial T, illuminated by Nicolas Gomez, mirrors the dedication of the church, performed by the friars singing at the altar, turning the pages in relationship to the musical sequence and meter. The vitality of the interface depends on the relationship of the encoded scale and the imagination to translate that scale with a sympathetic eye. So while technologies like AAAF define relationships of pixels and physical dimensions in a technical specification, the implementation of these frameworks is socially motivated and dependent on our imagination. Thank you.
My paper today focuses on art made for and exhibited in the micro-gallery Shelter in Place, which circulated virtually on the social media platform Instagram. Boston artist Eben Haynes, in collaboration with his wife Delaney Dameron, built the one-room gallery and curated exhibitions during COVID from March 2020 to November 2021 with 2 recent additional shows. The Shelter in Place gallery constitutes a unique example of the interplay between small-scale word making and its simultaneous digital circulation. The building size of roughly 50 times 60 times 80 centimeters, or 20 times 25 times 30 inches, determines the dimensions of the art objects. The followers' online viewing, primarily on their cell phones, and their interactive comments collectively participate in the illusion of a tangible art space. This is not a naive confusion of the real and the virtual, but a sophisticated understanding of the dynamics of disavowal in a shared process that binds the followers to each other. We know these objects are small, but we playfully perform perceptions of their monumentality. With the creation of the microgallery, the couple responded to the closing of museums and galleries, which robbed artists of access to audiences. Haynes was furloughed from the position at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The challenges of studio and exhibition space are pervasive beyond the period of the pandemic, especially with gentrification in an urban environment such as Boston. The physical presence of the microgallery structure in the couple's apartment reflects the transformation of home during the pandemic, when external activities such as work, childcare, and sports moved inside. The context of the pandemic is the only scholarly frame in which the Shelter in Place gallery has been discussed in a chapter in the 2023 collection, Interiors in the Era of COVID-19, co-authored by Haynes himself with curators Michelle Miller-Fisher and Courtney Harris. Haynes began with interior shots while announcing the gallery's scale, but also showed the gallery's exterior once within the early days of circulation on Instagram. However, on Thanksgiving in November 2020, the couple posted a composed photo that did not partake in the gallery's illusionary quality. Sitting next to the gallery's structure in front of Haynes's own paintings, they gave over almost half of the image's space to the gallery's exterior makeshift construction. In general, postings represented images that created a fantasy of an anthropomorphic environment by withholding context that would provide a comparative scale. During the period of the pandemic, Shelter-in-Place Gallery exhibited around 90 artists, a rough number because some of the exhibitions were also collaborations. Relatively soon after beginning, Haynes established what became a familiar rhythm with weekly shows. He created suspense by announcing upcoming exhibitions, and followers played along by voicing their anticipation. Objects such as a table with chairs, a laptop, and cups claimed realism. 3 posts accompanied each exhibition with images from different angles that provided multiple perspectives, simulating a visit. Similarly, the sequential posting from photographs to videos and from medium long shots to close-ups increased the familiarity with the objects. Haynes's accompanying texts mimicked the events at an actual gallery, from the arrival of packaged objects, for example in miniature crates, to the opening of an exhibition. The couple neither received compensation for their labor nor sold art with commission or for profit. The pandemic dramatically increased the use of communication platforms such as Zoom, social media, and streaming. On Instagram, users scroll vertically to see different posts and swipe horizontally to see multiple images of a singular post. The platform also captures all posts in one scroll with 3 tiles horizontally and a potentially infinite stream vertically, providing a chronologically organized visual archive. In short, the platform combines the immediacy of scrolling with a repository of exhibitions, including introductions and artist statements, as well as followers' reactions and conversations. COVID produced countervailing dynamics, increased mediation on the one hand, and an intense awareness of embodiment through sickness and death on the other. Access to the tiny scale, I suggest, was integral to Shelter-in-Place ability to offer an aesthetic mode of working through these tensions. Haynes offered a forum to enact community during a time when the pandemic uprooted people's familiar social moorings. Audiences commented on exhibitions and individual pieces with effective reactions of surprise and wonder, giving voice to the immediacy of viewing social media on their phone. Quote, "Every time I see your gallery show up on my feed, it makes my heart flutter." They also contributed thoughtful responses that deeply engaged with individual art pieces. Users took pleasure in simultaneous realness and simulation by admiring minor details such as outlets or tools, aspects that increased the simulacra's realism, indicating that they were aware that Haynes crafted the environment. They shared their own experiences and feelings, including stories of their loss, while their light-hearted banter demonstrated an awareness about the serious concerns of the art market and the culture industry. Even though the gallery enjoyed a significant following on Instagram with substantive interaction and garnered positive reviews by the press at the time, scholars have not paid attention to the art on its own terms, maybe because of its diminutive size, or what at this conference has been called the hierarchy of scale. In the rest of my paper today, I will focus on 7 of the exhibitions that are representative of intersecting trends that emerge from the 1.5 year of the gallery: a conscious and multi-directional play with scale, a turn to craft with attention to domesticity and interiority, the working through the pandemic's psychological dimensions, and large-scale installations in the tiny format. The selections of works I discuss reflects the limited time of my brief presentation, their representative nature, and the productivity of their engagement with scale. It is not a judgment on their aesthetic quality. Many more of the artists exhibited in the gallery deserve serious attention. The fact that my presentation covers only women artists reflects their relatively higher number in the Shelter-in-Place gallery than in other contemporary art exhibitions, with over half and almost 2/3 of the show featuring female-identified artists. This also suggests that the small scale offered access to women artists to create visions of largeness otherwise denied. Their works reflect the heightened awareness of domesticity and interior space during the pandemic, which also compounded art's increasing integration of craft. Artists recombined and repurposed dollhouse furniture in sculptural assemblages to play with scalar visions. Viewers not only perceived the diminutive size and the appearance of largeness simultaneously, but also recognized the combination of mass-produced objects of idealized domesticity with sculptures that evoked the lineage of modern art. Chelsea Rebel created monuments out of dollhouse furniture that define a formative understanding of home and domesticity. The white paint heightens ornamentation and creates a contrast between the minimalist installation and the original maximalist design of traditional Victorian dollhouse furniture. The 3 sculptures appear to be of human height relative to the gallery's imaginary anthropomorphic scale, and orient towards the front of the room an open fourth wall. Tightly compressed objects visibly consist of different decorative pieces. They evoke Victorian empty homes in which white cloth covers furniture and thus take on a haunting quality. The assemblages estrange the original style and erase their appearance function. However, the role of toy chairs, tables, and closets lies in their pretense of delightful play. The sculptures deconstruct the objects that constitute miniature culture's traditional interiority and reconstructs their part as fine arts objects inside the small-scale gallery where they appear outsized. Haynes provides a sequence of close-ups that present the sculptures from different perspectives, enabling a sense of moving through the space such that details come into view. Jessica Burko also uses dollhouse furniture as the basis for her art installation. However, her tiny assemblage reproduces her artwork in miniature. The structure of small drawers with black and white photographs appears expansive in the gallery. In the before times, Burko created large-scale installations in a Boston studio from discarded old-fashioned wooden drawers, which she collected and arranged into architectural sculptures. During the pandemic, her bedroom and nightstand became her workplace, and she substituted dollhouse furniture for found materials. The installation reproduces her work in the gallery's scale. Drawers, which typically contain, hide, and organize intimate possessions, frame the photographs of personal memories.
Similar to Revel's sculptures, the deconstruction and assemblage confuses the perceptions of these utilitarian objects. Their pattern stacking along the walls creates an intriguing mystery as it both pleases aesthetically and appears chaotic, random, informal, and unorganized. The combination of intimate photographs, for example, of baby feet, and used furniture invokes correspondences between everyday objects and the memories they hold for their users. While other artists use dollhouse furniture to scale up the appearance of the size of their sculptures in this microenvironment, Berko scales down her material basis and creates the illusion of an anthropomorphic installation. Alyssa Ackerman, who specializes in fiber art, similarly produced work that appears gigantic, even though spectators would recognize the traditional small and decorative doilies. The objects on the back and left wall are all round and square pieces of lattice to protect furniture surfaces from water stains in the petit bourgeois household. Yet the visible stitching in the center portrays realistic embraces framed by conventional patterns. The nude holes express intimacy and care. A miniature standing floating frame includes a third image of caressing hands. The art expresses the longing for intimate touch during the pandemic when social distancing interrupted such connections. Ackerman revalidates embroidery as a craft by claiming the space of the gallery. On a cell phone, the image in its reduced size would appear to show artistic photographs or paintings of human touch. The attentive viewer on the computer looking at Haynes's final days extreme close-up can admire the traces of manual labor that distinguishes Ackerman's original work from the doilies' machine-produced patterns. The craft incorporates the touch that it depicts, which is repeated by cell phone users on slick cold surfaces instead of the soft cloth that mimics human skin and that is handled by human touch. Jennifer Liston Munson's show, Inclinadas, Leaning In from Mexico City, stages a studio setting with seemingly large pieces leaning against the walls, while notebooks, a toolbox, hammer, blue tape, laptop, cups, and books are strewn on the floor. The resin echoes Mexican billboards in striking colors and distinct vertical shapes that evoke modernism. Munson explores the scale of modernist art in its historical and transnational context. She created the laptop that can be opened and shows the artwork in miniature on the screen, evoking what Susan Stewart famously called miniatures within, within, within. Munson transformed billboards, an outdated advertising tool, from the public sphere to small art objects which appear huge as they occupy the gallery walls, even though the central back piece measures only 8 by 12 inches. The miniature books, in itself a genre, copies of Peter Chadwick's This Brutal World and Josef Albers in Mexico, reference the monumental scale of brutalist architecture and Albert's collection of Mesoamerican small art. By creating a miniature laptop with an art piece that we see on the wall on its screen, Munson reflects on the interplay between the material and digital representation, which audiences duplicate when they view her exhibition on a mobile digital screen. Similarly, several exhibitions create the illusion of large immersive installations, which the small scale of the microgallery paradoxically enables. In addition, their material and spatial compositions provide a sense of immersion with kinetic, affective, and tactile fantasies of engagement. This is the case despite their digital circulation that makes their space physically inaccessible. The gallery's construction of a seemingly human scale with doors, windows, and a table, and the opening of the fourth wall enable a perception of the space as anthropomorphic, such that users can project themselves into it. Haynes's digital representation enhances the effect by excluding external context that would provide a comparative scale. His photographs increase intimacy as they move from medium shots to close-ups. Short videos with tracking shots throughout the installation enact the visit to an exhibition. His sequencing from stills to moving images increase proximity and intimacy. Adding new views simulates the process of entering and proceeding through an art show while gaining physical orientation with increasingly different vantage points. Haynes's curatorial role exceeds installing the exhibition according to artist's instruction and extends to digital representation through photographing, filming, and posting. The installations that appear grand rely on the predetermined small size to enable the illusion of enveloping space. Projecting expansiveness through miniatures contrasts to the association of grandeur with aura, which presumes that monumentality requires the experience of sublime greatness. Mary Pedicini's There Are Rooms Which Are Sometimes Forgotten transforms the gallery into an all-encompassing environment that reflects on the pandemic in abstract and material ways. 2 off-white latex cylinders hang from the ceiling beam. Typical for what Elaine Chelsea Patterson and Susan Sorrent termed, quote, sloppy craft, Pedicini exposes the traces of her making with rough threads, uneven cuts, and random cutouts. During the pandemic, latex moved from the hospital to the home, where a shortage of gloves, along with face masks and hand sanitizers, created panic. Suddenly, the material's qualities became intimately familiar and crucial to survival. While the material prevents the touching of human skin, the central structures exude the warmth of shelter, reminiscent of bubbles in which people socialized during the pandemic. Pedicini re-articulates the pandemic's everyday experience of home and material objects through an abstract and tactile reconfiguration of the gallery space. Also responding to the pandemic, Sean Tyler's enveloping installation, Shrouds and Ghosts, Mourns the Dead. The crafted ephemeral material consists of sheer filigree shapes that hang from the ceiling and fill the space with dreamlike setting. A fiber artist, Tyler crafted see-through mesh that appears light and immaterial. A close-up reveals the contours of doctors and nurses with masks and lines of black beads hanging from the material constructions. The artist considered the beads to be shrouds that represent the enormity of the loss. The moving camera's close-up of individual strings and beads reveal the material's haunting lightness. Nina Early's installation, Temporary Tides, continues the combination of a gigantic, all-encompassing scene with fiber art sloppy craft, but shifts the photos to eco-criticism. Reminiscent of the ocean, blue fabric tubes suspend from the ceiling from a grid made of ropes. Her world-making occurs underwater, with dreamlike and beautiful day and night visions. The night view includes tender movement of play with light and blue color variations. Close-ups during the day and night views enable the audience to perceive the fabric's materiality with its simultaneously roughness and ephemerality, while the comprehensive photographs invite the spectator into the scene. In conclusion, the Shelter-in-Places Gallery's miniature scale paradoxically enabled artists to create visions of monumental objects and enveloping environments. It also empowered many more young women artists to participate than is typical for contemporary art shows. Exhibitions reflected the pandemic's heightened sensory awareness of interiority and domesticity, often expressed through crafting. Artists transformed the loss of life and desire for intimacy into aesthetic experiences. Reflecting on the roles of objects for remembering, they reconfigured the relationship between material items and photographic representation. They miniaturized objects, for example billboards, while also conversely used dollhouse furniture to create illusions of sculptural assemblages of anthropomorphic scale. Spectators who viewed the exhibitions on their cell phone engaged in cognitive processes of rescaling from small screens to large imaginaries. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for just such an incredibly interesting day and week and pair of days. Though I've sat quietly in the back, I have lots of thoughts, none of which I'm going to subject you to. But I am Stephen Whiteman again. I guess I said that before. I am the chair of the final panel in our proceedings entitled Our Landing Spots, which involve two papers that think about landscape, extraction, the climate, and the world more broadly, all of which are, I thank the organizers for giving me this panel because I'm very much aligned with my own research interests. We will have two papers. I will follow the recent practice of introducing both now. The first paper, Miniature to Monumental, the resulting overlapping scales of coal extraction and human inhabitation, and Amonate, I got to the end, yeah? Is Amonate close? Yeah, you'll say it in a second, and then you'll correct me. Is being given by colleagues from Virginia Tech, Gonzalo Munoz Vera and Sean Rosier. Sean Rosier is a Kiwi, according to his bio, and has made for Point South already. And so Gonzalo will be representing the team this afternoon. Thank you for coming. And our second paper by Pavna Jain from Central St. Martin's is entitled Ecopoiesis and the Politics of Scale, Land Art, Climate Action, and Embodied Memory in Ladakh. And Pavna is a master's student at Central St. Martin's here in London, and I gather is finishing, has submitted your MA project in a week. Was working on her MA project. Congratulations in advance. And so, now I don't know what to do. You're going to do that. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to welcome Gonzalo to the podium. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Thanks to the organizers for this such a fantastic conference today. It's been a pleasure to be here among such fantastic presentations. So the title of my presentation, as Stefan already said or mentioned, is Miniature to Monumental, the resulting overlapping scales of coal extraction and human inhabitation in Amonate. So I'm going to talk about this company town in Southwest Virginia. And first of all, I have to recognize the work of my colleagues at Virginia Tech. This paper it was written along with Sean Rosier. I'm here representing both of us. But this is part of an ongoing research, and that includes, as you can see, different members from different disciplines and departments at Virginia Tech: landscape architecture, design, history, heritage conservation, and community design initiatives as well, cinema as well, I'm forgetting that. So yeah, my colleagues here are somehow in image present with me. I also have to mention Michelle as well. She's the point of contact between us and the town of Amonate. She's a fantastic woman. All right, so I'm going to start with this presentation. So visitors traveling to the coal company town Amonate encounter a sense of human scale upon arrival after detouring through nature and remoteness, leaving behind the townships and cities around the area. Embedded within the Appalachian Mountains in southwest Virginia, Amonate receives visitors with the single and two-story dwellings, a couple of churches, and a post office, all line up through the only street that has configured this town since its foundation in the early 20th century. Amonate, an unincorporated community in Tazewell County, Virginia, was established in 1920 by the Faraday Coal and Coke Company and subsequently acquired by the Pocahontas Fuel Company in 1923. Under Pocahontas Fuel's direction, the town was developed as a company-owned settlement, with most of its residential and industrial infrastructure constructed to support coal extraction from the Pocahontas No. 3 seam, a coal bed renowned for its low sulfur content and high thermal efficiency. Amonate exemplifies the spatial logic of early 20th century coal towns, where architecture and infrastructure were scaled to the rhythms and demands of industrial labor. Notably, It remains one of the few surviving examples of such towns in the Appalachian region that continues to host an operational mine. The site was operated by Courtauld Energy, successor to Pocahontas Fuel, following its mid-century consolidation, until 2012, when it was acquired by Ramaco Resources Incorporated, which has since maintained its operations. As such, Amonare offers a rare case study of industrial continuity and spatial persistence within a region often characterized by post-industrial decline, and serves as a material archive of the bodily and environmental scales of extractive capitalism. Well, this image actually is the town. Is the town that you can find nowadays. Just a street with buildings and amenities on each side of the street, surrounded by the landscape that you can see, of course, from this aerial view. Amonare, once promoted as a model company town, was characterized by a comprehensive integration of residential, commercial, and industrial infrastructure, including worker housing, mining facilities, and direct rail access, features emblematic of early 20th century company town planning in the Appalachian region. At its demographic height, the town supported an estimated population of 840 residents. In 2020, that number declined to just 59, reflecting broader patterns of post-industrial depopulation. Despite this decline, some original structures remain, offering a fragmented yet significant architectural record of the town's historical function and social organization. These include 2 churches, 22 single-story houses, 28 two-story houses, 3 mobile homes, and a post office, all in varying states of preservation. Several of the original residences, including those historically assigned to the mine supervisor and company physician, remain occupied. However, much of the town's original built environment has been lost, including key communal and commercial structures such as the company store, the train depot, theater, and recreational facilities. The extant housing stock reflects 2 standardized models of single-story dwellings and 4 distinct 2-story typologies, underscoring the company's role in shaping both the spatial and social hierarchies of the community. So this is the original plan of Amonare. As you can see, this is like, that continues a street, but the current active town is now reduced to this area only. So this was totally demolished through time, and this is the remaining structure that you saw also in the previous slide. Today, the people of Amonare do not have work-related ties to the mining industry anymore. The town does not provide miners housing, services, and amenities either, as in the past, leaving only the locals' houses and 1 active church. Suspended in time and space, the current population of Amonare refuses to abandon their properties and a past that still lingers and brings joyful memories of a better time. This past has left humans inhabiting a town-scale environment that most likely will never expand above and adjacent to an almost incommensurable underground built environment that most ignore or have never seen. The bygone interaction between above and underground inhabitations has ended. However, the built structures stand still. This paper explores and exposes these dissimilar but overlapping scales of inhabitation in times of subsidized operations and automated mining technology that have displaced the local human workforce and therefore the company town's rationale. Based on an ongoing investigation that includes interviewing locals, archival research, on-site inventory, and survey of buildings, the project aims to enhance the extant community and contribute to heritage preservation in former company towns of the Appalachian region. This is actually an image from this year. This is the current state of the town. So I'm going to refer now to the scales of inhabitation that I just mentioned. Amonare had 2 main groups of people based on where they mainly inhabited. those who lived exclusively above ground, and those who worked underground in the coal mine. By considering these two groups, two main scales of inhabitation unfolded. On the one hand, the above-ground inhabitants solely reside over the surface and in the various buildings that constituted the town. On the other hand, the miners who transitioned between the level above ground of Amonate and its underground, where the mine was located. The latter interacted with the two realities at different time and spaces, while the former physically stayed on one dimension of inhabitation. These two overlapping scales are here exposed. This is a composite image that takes actually an image of Amonate while it was being constructed, and an image of the underground mine. And I just put them all together just to give an idea of these two overlapping scales. So, as with any other company town in the area, activities at the town scale unfolded daily in Amonate through everyday life practices such as shopping at the company store, watching a film in the theater, visiting the doctor, or attending church and school. The above-ground Amonate inhabitants performed their daily lives by finding those places at walking distance due to the extent of the town, which suited the needs of the 840 residents it once had. While wandering through the streets of Amonate, flanked by the rows of houses and hills on each side, life in this company town evolved routinely, sustained by the coal bonanza, which promised a stable present, a future of its inhabitants and the country. Here represented by an image that probably is familiar to most of you from the movie Dogville, which also is based on a company town. And as you can see, the town was also structured or organized around one street. Life above ground involved displacement based on clear objectives and fundamental functions in order to cope with everyday essentials. Amonate offered a straightforward network of necessary resources available nearby at the surface level. For its inhabitants, dwelling within a dedicated area that included housing, basic services, and amenities made life functional and simple within such an expanse of land, particularly for a community not yet relying on the car and with a currency uniquely valid in town, the scripts. Long-distance travel, on the other hand, involved reaching the destination of non-existent services in Amonate, such as hospitals, high schools, and universities. As in several other company towns worldwide, Amonate represented a bubble community to its inhabitants, bounded by nature and above the mineral source that constituted its existence and income. Its isolation from urbanity continues today because of the area's lack of cellular network and internet. So in order to reach this town, you really need to follow written directions, otherwise the GPS is not going to work. And this is an image actually of the company town with no data, but this is, it was kind of the center of the town. Accordingly, the human body above ground in Amonate dealt with a sufficient built environment designed at the human scale, with the religious structures as the tallest buildings, followed by the two-story houses and the company store that we just saw in the previous slide. Nature as the absolute background of the town, through its hills, sky, and ground, has represented the all-encompassing landscape, the limiting surroundings, contrasting with the geometrical structures of the built environment at ground level. Following previous company town designs constructed in the area, the houses of Amonate define the shape and picturesqueness of the place, organized along Amonate Street. Containing a variety of cultural backgrounds from the immigrants and locals inhabiting Amonate, the different house typologies define the fabric of this town even deeper, along with the distance from these neighborhoods to the town's amenities and services. These are two images of plans and elevations and designed for the original Amonate town that was before known as Faraday, but these are actually the drawings. Similar to the urban design of the linear city developed by Arturo Soria in Spain around 1885, Amonate replicated a miniaturized pattern of what the Spaniard urbanist proposed, displacing the railway to a separated and upper level due to its industrial purposes, and the public space relying on the surrounding nature and Amonate Street. The town kept the scale and alignment of the linear city, removing entirely the interconnectedness sought by Soria y Mata. This is an example of a linear city at the time, and as you can see, organized around a single street, similar to what Amonate of today is experiencing. Although distant and concealed from the daily life of Amonate's inhabitants, the connection to the underground mine, the Greasy Creek, and Danforth portals, as well as the processing plant, made physical and visual separations even more profound between the two scales of inhabitation. Located 11 kilometers from Amonate, the Greasy Creek portal served as the original gateway for miners to descend to the underground levels of the mine, leaving temporarily behind life over the topsoil of the earth. This is an image of another company town in the area, Bishop, which is quite similar to the conditions that Amonate miners had. The mine represented the subterranean world as the opposite of the town of Amonate. Miners displaced towards the portals located off town to reach the mine. Based on work shifts and roles in extracting coal, miners moved within the mine through hunch-over movements, private of natural light and fresh air. Within the mine, workers also found a different arrangement of spaces and circulation compared to the Amonate above ground. The mine offered a network of functional spaces based exclusively on coal extraction trades. In this subsoil, dwelling was purely based on work in an expanding subterrestrial and horizonless territory, where time and space collapsed. The scale and shape of spaces were carved as excavation progressed following coal seams. The outcome was a checkerboard-like and carved environment with coal pillars sustaining the ground above each coal seam level. That underground gridiron city might have resembled Çatalhöyük, the Neolithic proto-city settlement of Anatolia, or the first Spanish 16th century urban development, progressively defining the shape and space of cities in Europe and colonial America. Unaware of this comparative urban morphology, Amonate miners experienced a drastic change of scale from linear town planning to a massive grid plan in a subterrestrial inhabitation absent of reference points. So this is the typology of mining that they had in Amonate. There are several, like at least 5 typologies, but the one that they actually implemented was the room and pillar mining, which basically means that they kept some coal pillars as the supporting structure of the above ground, and they create these corridors in order to advance and extract the coal in a particular direction. And this is an image representing that situation, that reality. Okay, so based on the presence and finding of coal seams, the underground Amonate expanded and keeps on doing it, taking almost the extension of a city compared to its topsoil counterpart. Even though having a checkerboard-like morphology with straight shapes, volume, and masses, its limitless and labyrinthic condition drastically contrasts with the miniaturized and compact version at ground level. In this predominating interiority, within perpetual darkness, the expanding horizontality differed from the compressed verticality of the mine, which determined a particular body inhabitation among the countless manufactured corridors confined by coal. The latter condition confirmed a denial of the human body, which had to adapt to the spatial conditions defined by mining. In the coal mine, the body functioned as another tool or medium for extracting coal. The spaces in the mine prioritize the industrial dimensions and scales of shuttle cars, conveyor belts, and continuous miner machines over those of the human body. Tainted in black by cold extraction and darkness, the body of miners was the only reference to human nature and a life above ground in a subterranean landscape as the container of the spaces carved by men. So I'm going to show here a series of images that display actually the overlapping scales of the subterranean world, represented here by this grid-like, checkerboard-like kind of arrangement, overlap with the town of Amonate over here. As you can see, these little squares represent the houses of the miners. So I'm going to advance so we can see closer the different conditions, the difference of scale between the above ground Amonate. This is a house. This is actually the elevation of the house placed just in front of one of them in order to display or show that actually one of the houses can fit in one of the corridors of the mine. The same with the image of a plan of the same house typology that perfectly could fit in this corridor. So you can see the difference of scales between these two worlds. So I'm going to refer now to the points of superimposition. We have been working with Sean in overlapping these two realities, these two worlds, and the drawings of the mine are extremely technical, and they never consider actually the existence of the town above ground. But we have been working on this overlapping with these graphic documents. So on December 27th, 1957, after continuous expansion of the coal mine under and towards the town of Amonate, the two scales of inhabitations he reviewed came into contact. A gas explosion in mine 31 over the Pocahontas seam number 4 occurred 83 meters right beneath the town. As you can see, this is the town in this circle, and the explosion took place in here. 83 meters below the town, the ground level. 11 miners died by asphyxiation, while 14 were trapped within the mine and rescued afterwards. The incident, perhaps imperceptible for above-ground dwellers, nonetheless revealed the overlapping conditions of two scales of inhabitation and the proximity many might have perceived as distant and unattainable. The kilometers distance of the concealed entry portals to the underground coal mine, the Greasy Creek and Danforth, collapsed when this unfortunate event marked a tragic milestone in the history of Amonate on the eve of 1957. Likewise, the awareness of standing over part of the coal mine, fifth and rationale of the town of Amonate, made starker the structural dependency, economic and physical, of its inhabitants and their well-being. So I'm going to here show actually, again, the location of the current town of Amonate and the two different entry portals. And this is the original, 11 kilometers distance from the town. So they definitely had to commute to the main entrance of the mine and work in the several different areas and coal seams that were underground. Later on, while the mine was expanding towards the city, they created another portal, the Danforth portal, so it was closer to where the miners inhabited. And the expansion, of course, continued until it reached the town of Amonate below ground, and in 1957 this incident happened. Okay, so I'm going to just show, and this is, we're working on a better section in order to show this interaction, this point of contact that occurred between these two scales of inhabitation. Here is the street, the town of Amonate, the street in the middle, and the 83 meters below ground over the Pocahontas number 4 seam of coal, and this is the graphic somehow display of this unfortunate event. I'm also I want to show another example of the situation under the explosion happened, and the life of 11 miners were taken. Actually, the United States Department of the Interior Bureau of Mines produced this document, also illustrating the physical space, or the place where this event happened. Here is actually the area of this gas explosion, right below the town of Amonare. They actually produced these documents, and so we can see a zoom-in of that particular area that I just showed. We can see here clearly the coal pillars compared with the corridors. In a closer look, we can actually see the shuttle cars, the coal belt, and an even closer look, the space of these machines, and the continuous miner machine over here that carves the mine, the width of the corridors. These are the coal pillars and other machinery around. So near yet so far, town and mine superimpose each other, bringing the tragedy closer to home as a recognition of proximity, or as a last goodbye from the 11 deceased miners to their relatives. Amonare experienced a decline in the following years of the explosion. The mine was shut down in 1959 and reopened in 1960. Shortage in coal orders also added to the uncertainty of the mines and its population's future. Growing car dependency heavily impacted as well the scale of inhabitation at the ground level, significantly expanding the interaction with nearby towns, services, and amenities to the detriment of the bubble community that once reigned in Amonate. Later, in 1993, and again in mine number 31, another gas explosion occurred, this time without casualties. Coal extraction in Amonate went idle in 2012 and was only reactivated in 2022 through Wamako Resources Incorporated. Today, Amonare does not host any active coal miners anymore. However, the scales of inhabitation still exist, converging two groups of dwellers who only interact by the overlapping realities below and above ground. And this is an image, of course, as you can read below, of the surviving miners of the accident in 1957. So to conclude, or as a conclusion, or temporary conclusion of this ongoing research, Amonare offers a compelling lens to examine the complex interplay between industrial infrastructure and human inhabitation. As a coal company town, it was shaped by the demands of extractive capitalism, which imposed overlapping yet distinct spatial and bodily scales, those of the surface level community and the subterranean labor force. Once synchronized through daily rhythms of work and life, these dual realities have since diverged, leaving behind a fragmented but evocative landscape of memory and materiality. The town's remaining structures, its modest homes, churches, and post office, stand as quiet witnesses to a bygone era when the coal seams dictated the rhythms of life beneath. Meanwhile, the vast unseen network of tunnels below continues to expand, a ghostly mirror to the shrinking community above. This juxtaposition of monumental underground infrastructure and miniature surface scale living reveals the profound disjunctions that industrialization can impose on human environments. This is another picture that actually shows the scale of the interaction, the overlapping scales of inhabitation, a miner coming home, having dinner with family. It's also from another company down around, from Eolia. So the 1957 mine explosion beneath Amonare serves as a stark reminder of the literal and symbolic proximity between these two worlds. It collapsed the illusion of separation, revealing the fragile interdependence of life above and labor below. Even today, with mining operations largely automated and disconnected from the local population, the spatial legacy of this duality persists. By documenting and analyzing these overlapping scales of inhabitation, this study contributes to a broader understanding of how industrial landscapes shape and are shaped by the people who inhabit them. It also underscores the importance of preserving such sites, not merely as relics of the past, but as living archives that embody the tensions, aspirations, and resilience of communities forged in the crucible of extractive economies. In doing so, Amonati becomes more than a case study. It becomes a symbol of the enduring human presence within the landscape of industrial transformation. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share my work and thoughts with you. I'm Bhavna Jain, an artist across installation, drawing, and community engagement. I want to begin with a provocation I wrote. Matters that matter are the matters that matter to the capitalist matters. But don't we matter too? Who are we, and how can we matter? As urgent as it is to speak about all these matters, nothing feels more pressing right now than the climate crisis. This is where this project begins. I have been exploring retrofuturism not as a nostalgia, but as a strategy, reimagining future rooted in ancestral, indigenous, and sustainable practices. This mezzotint reflects the work I'm sharing. It carries the emotional tone of my experience in Ladakh, quiet, intense, and deeply felt. My art grows from intuition, embodied making, and deep listening to place. It challenges the narrow voices dominating climate discourse. This is where my art begins. This paper is written in a form of an artistic research journaling. Ladakh sits over 3,000 meters high in the Himalayas, a place where the sun burns, water is scarce, the wind carves silence into stone. It sometimes felt like Mars. But it's also a front line of climate disruption. Glaciers retreat, water shifts unpredictably, and farming cycles grow uncertain. These changes aren't distant forecasts, they are daily realities. Yet Ladakh holds deep ecological wisdom built on coexistence rather than control. Its traditions are survival blueprints for the fragile place. Despite this, Ladakh's carbon footprint remains among the lowest in the world. Climate extremes meet resilience here. In July 2024, I joined Himalayan Institute of Alternatives to connect with climate research and create a land art piece from local materials. Here you see Ladakh's map and some aerial views from the arrival. So this is the first photo I took from the aeroplane when I arrived to Ladakh. My work unfolded as an experiment in scale, physical, perceptual, ecological. At its heart is ecopoiesis, the idea that art can do more than represent ecology. It can actively create ecological meaning. I'm not just making an object in the landscape. I'm entering a relationship with the land, a dialogue, even a form of homemaking, using local materials, basgo, soil, markalak, buttermud, sticks, stones, and this soil was also used in the Ladakhi monasteries constructed thousands of years ago, carrying their spirit and longevity. These materials respond to wind, water, sunlight, reshape the work over time. The art lives, evolving and dissolving, becomes part of the ecosystem, not a fixed artifact. Through this, art generates ecological meaning by embedding in natural processes, creating space for connection and awareness beyond mere representation. The second concept is the politics of scale, a way of questioning how we measure impact and what counts as big enough to matter. While building this installation with my hands in the earth, in conversation with the land and the people, I often felt incredibly small. Even though the piece spans 6 meters in diameter, the vast Himalayan terrain made it feel like a miniature. And yet, the experience of working on it and the community engagement around it made its impact feel expansive and enduring. So, the third concept I'm working with is a strong anthropic principle, a cosmological idea that human consciousness and presence are an essential part of the universe. This idea positions humans not as detached observers but as integral participants in ecological system. For example, During the creation of the installation, my own presence, later the presence of the local community member, was inseparable from the land and the materials. In the words of Donna Haraway, I was becoming with, not simply making something on the land, but making with it. The sun, the dust, the clay, the wind, and the people all shaped the work as much as I did. This reciprocity is where I locate phenomenology in my process, being fully present in place, attuning my senses to the environment and allowing the work to emerge through this relationship. This process of becoming with emphasizes collaboration, interdependence, and humility in artistic practice, a way of working that mirrors indigenous approaches to land and community. This cave became my shelter, my studio, and eventually a gathering point. In the afternoons when sun was too sharp or the wind too feral, I retreated inside, not to isolate but to listen. I began drawing, sometimes with charcoal, sometimes with breath, sometimes through conversation. People passed by, Ladakhi locals, curious elders, students from the Himalayan Institute of Alternatives. Some asked questions, others offered help. Eventually they joined. We co-built the space, layering the walls with drawings, mine and theirs. It wasn't planned, it emerged. We exchanged stories, we laughed, and gradually the cave became more than just a shelter. It became a memory chamber, a space textured by torch, by sound, by dust, by care. This movement and this space speaks directly to ecopoiesis. The cave wasn't just a backdrop to an artwork, it became the ecology of the artwork itself. What we created there wasn't a static object, but a social ecosystem, an unfolding process shaped by land, time, weather, and community. And in terms of scale, this was a miniature world, not grand, not monumental, just a small, dark, hollow in the mountain, but dense with presence, dense with memory. I think this is what politics of scale can mean, that impact does not have to be measured in square footage or permanence. Sometimes it resonates, spaces are more intimate ones. So much of climate discourse speak in scales too large to feel. But here, in shaded pockets of stone, we built something felt, and I think that matters. As the land art began to take shape, others joined. These are volunteers who came not to observe but to co-create. Some helped move stones, others smoothed the earth, some just sat and watched, and that too was a part of the work. I didn't see this project as my land art. I saw it as a becoming with, again borrowing Donna Haraway's phrase, where boundaries between artist, participant, witness, and land began to dissolve. What was important to me wasn't perfection or outcome, but the moment of shared intention, the gesture of bending down to touch the earth, to place a stone, to smooth a contour. It became a kind of a ritual of care, of attention. This is also where the project stepped deeper into ecopoiesis, not only in its material dialogue with the land, but in a social ecology. The act of making was dispersed, shared, open. Art here becomes a conduit, not a product for connection. And here, this aerial view shifts the perceptual frame entirely. From the ground, the work was close and tactile, but from above it reveals its full form, almost like a natural sculpture or a breath pressed into the land. This shift in scale from intimate to paranomic raises a core question in my practice. What is the scale of impact? Must we always see the whole to feel the weight? Or can presence, even fleeting or partial, be enough? This image reactivates the politics of scale in my project. It reminds me that scale isn't only about size, but about framing, about perspective. From the ground, the work was a conversation, and from above, it becomes a trace. Both are real, both are a part of ecological meaning the work generates. And crucially, it is ephemeral. The sun will bleach it, the wind will shift it, snow in the winter will bury it, and maybe eventually there will be no physical sign. it ever existed. But I believe the gestures stay in memory, in soil, in story. I cleared a path with sticks and stones, not to impose but to guide. A quiet line drawn in the dust, inviting people to walk slowly, to arrive with attention. It was a way to choreographing encounter, not with grandeur but with grace. Embedded within this path was solar-powered lights, traced the way, a quiet fusion of traditional materials and sustainable technology. In activating the cave, I transformed it into a dynamic site of ecological presence and social exchange. The drawings on the wall, mine and those contributed by visitors, created a layered memory space embodying ecopoiesis, the generation of ecological meaning through ongoing interaction rather than fixed form. This process emphasized the cave not just as a shelter, but as a living archive of place and participation. The cave's modest size contrasts with the intensity of the engagement it fostered. In this intimate setting, people lingered not to observe but to contribute, connect, and reflect. This challenged the assumption that impactful environment art must be large or permanent. Here, scale was measured in duration, attention, and shared experience, in how deeply the work resonated, not how far it extended. The strong Anthropic principle highlights how human awareness shapes ecological meaning. In Ladakh, I encountered a responsive ecological deeply embedded in indigenous knowledge and land care. The artwork became an co-created spaces where people, place, and memory intertwine in ongoing ecological relationship. Now, I'd like to share a short film that encapsulates the unfolding of this project, the making, the land, and the community coming together. Please watch not only what happens on screen, but how it feels. In the film, you'll see me playing the sulur, a tribal flute from Chhattisgarh, as a mourning song. Its haunting sound drifts through the dust, genuinely guiding people from solar trail to the land art installation. Their movement is slow and intuitive, led by resonance and connection rather than mere curiosity. The final aerial image shows the land art after the performance. People stayed for hours. It reminded me that scale can be measured not by size or permanence, but by how long something lives within us and between us. In this sense, the piece becomes a site of ecopoiesis where ecological meaning was not only represented but co-created. It invited slowness, relationality, and kind of shared time that resists the accelerated pace of crisis narratives. As Donna Haraway writes, we must stay with the trouble. This work was an attempt to do just that, to hold space for witnessing, for community, and for imagining how small, place-based gestures might carry planetary significance. As an artist, I don't claim expertise, but I do claim presence, and I hope my presence and this work contributes in some way to a shared ecological story we are all writing. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions or feedback about anything at all, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. If I could invite both of you up to the table. Thank you both for this very rich pair of papers that I think go really wonderfully together. While everybody thinks of their questions, I just thought I'd reflect on a few themes. And during the last paper, during the last panel rather, I was thinking to myself that I was amazed that we'd come through an entire conference about scale with as many papers having to do with China as we've had here, and no one's mentioned Zhuangzi the whole time. And so I thought I'd sort of start by reflecting. Zhuangzi is, for those who don't know, is an ancient Chinese philosopher. Ancient, I shouldn't use that word, but a sort of Zhou period Chinese philosopher who thought a lot about the relativity of knowledge. And he particularly thought about issues of scale as they related between the body, either of us or of insects, or of massive pung birds, who are these huge birds that sort of blotted out the sun with the size of their wings, or whether through a very famous passage that many of you have probably read, called Autumn Floods, where the river travels down to the sea. The river thinks itself so mighty, and then travels down to the sea and discovers that it's actually very small. And I say this as a sort of way of introduction because we've also thought a lot in the last 2 days about the body as the sort of metric for scale, rightly so, right? Objects that are related to the body the way our body relates to an object, whether through a hand or through experience. But another very important part of that, which we've talked a little bit less about perhaps, is landscape, or is the land, is the world, and how we relate to that. And they operate as a sort of pair of scalar measures. And so we don't just sort of relate things to our body, but we also relate our body to the land and things as a sort of triangulating position with the sort of third element of scale. And Professor Lin's talk yesterday touched briefly on Chinese gardens, which particularly illustrate this, the way in which a lot of the experience of Chinese gardens and many gardens is connected to sort of the willful either distortion or play with or manipulation or forgetting about that relationship between the body and the world. That I know in my mind how big I am relative to the building that I'm standing next to or the rock that I'm standing next to. But if I suspend that knowledge for a moment, if I forget about that scalar relationship, then I can imagine this building as a palace, then I can imagine this rock as a mighty peak. And that came up, that type of not forgetting, but sort of, and not manipulation in both your cases. I think Pavma is more yours because you're thinking very consciously about the work that you're creating in the land. But Gonzalo, in the town, also you talked about the sort of constraints of this relationship, or on the imagination as being very strong. And I thought a little bit as you were speaking about the way in which that horizontally the mind extends and grows and grows and grows, but it's very, very low and you have to stoop to be under it. But when you're in a rural Virginia town that can be accessed only by a road that you can't find on a map, the scale sort of extends infinitely vertically, but actually horizontally is very, very small. And there's that sort of interesting tension between the two. Similarly with your aerial views of your work, I really like the way in which you could see the whole thing. The other thing another thing that you both talked a lot about were time scales and the ways in which in which communities and time extended further through these, which is also, of course, of interest of Zhuangzi's. And finally, I just sort of thought a little bit about how, for both of you, but one of the triangulating positions between community and the earth, or community and the land, or excuse me, the individual and the earth, or the individual and the landscape, was community. And that is a scale that was a very important sort of, in a sense, intermediate position for both of you. So I don't know that I have any questions at the end of all of that, except that I found it a very generative pair of papers. You may have responses, or I'm very happy to open it to the floor. You don't have to have responses.
I can talk about, so the work that I made dissolves over time. So the scale now disappears. So it exists only in memories. So that's where, when you were talking about scale in context of a landscape, it is not, even that concept is not permanent, right? It will be evolving. The landscapes are always changing. So I think this is how my work responds in a landscape.
Yeah, we'll just add that, yeah, in the case of the company town, this group that lives above the ground are not really aware of how the mine is actually structured. These drawings have been pulled out recently by this research. And not even the miners maybe had a clear idea of this structure, how the limits of the mine, how extended towards and below the town at some point. So there was this disconnection, I think, or a non-visual kind of recognition of what was going on below, even though, of course, it was a company town, and they were seeing, the miners coming back, painted in black. But there was a kind of visual and awareness somehow of how this world was constructed below, or actually being expanded. Mm-hmm. So, and this project also involved oral histories. We are interviewing the surviving community, and yeah, they don't really know. They don't really know much how the world was, except if you were a miner, of course. But even though it's very unclear how they move in this network of tunnels and pillars, compared to what they had, of course, on the ground, which was simply a street with houses on each side of the road. So this disconnection, visual, especially, the underground world is always dark. So it was very hard for them to have this awareness of space.
It's also interesting that both of you are talking about a sort of scale of time that is measured, if you will, if you can imagine the unit of one memory. Like it's all measured in memory. Yeah. And as it disappears in the past, that scale sort of falls, or that sort of thing begins to fall away. Yeah, it's very interesting. Questions, please.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, I want to give a special thank you to Bhavana for your great paper, and I really appreciate that we had an artist talk here, and I also thought it was really helpful that you performed sort of the way in which artists now are informed by theory, by referring to Donna Haraway, which is really a question for us as scholars. What is left for us to do? It's a weird issue with current, contemporary artists. But I'm saying all this to say that I actually do have a question for Gonzalo, and I'm sort of using Bhavana's emphasis on artistic collaboration and working together. And in your paper, sort of the sense that the body disappears in that kind of industrial production, and you doing these oral interviews. And so I was just thinking of like miners' choirs and orchestras and boxing, whether there is a way in miners' culture to reappropriate the body, and whether part of the problem is that kind of split between work and leisure, or whether you ask in your oral interviews, whether you ask about their own experience of bodies and sort of cultural expression, whether you find anything, or whether there's really a sense of the body disappears in this kind of industrial mechanism.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, because I think we took this role with a lot of pride. We were very proud of being miners, and they are very proud of that past as well. So And that's why they reached to us. They wanted to keep this community alive. There's just 59 inhabitants at this point, and it's of course decreasing. They don't refer much to the dangers of working under those conditions. In the past, it was probably even worse. Somehow they avoid talking about the denial of the human body or the fact that there were explosions. It was a part of a duty that they somehow acquired and performed. But so yeah, for them, they were extremely proud. They have a union as well. There's a huge union of miners in the States as well. So they felt like this with a lot of pride. So they don't refer much to those kind of things. Even the explosion, we were very curious to know if they felt it, because it was just 83 meters below ground. And some of them, they said, yeah, we felt it. And some of them, no, there was nothing like it. So there's a kind of unclear information about that either. Some of them probably they don't want to talk about it, because it was of course a shameful moment in that particular company town. But yeah, they don't refer much to this condition as something that was imposed. I think they took it with a lot of pride.
Thank you both for your papers. I find it really interesting that besides the land, another common denominator in your papers, I thought, was the question of emotion. Right? It came up quite clearly in both. So with Amonate, there's this very strong sense of nostalgia, I thought. I mean, that was a term we used yesterday as well. Even the motto of the town, like Amonate always, it's like, what could be more nostalgic about this town that is like reduced in size? And then with your project, Bhavana, the climate crisis is well, not the elephant in the room, but the whole framework, right? So there's existential fear, there's concern, there's worry, and yet the kind of the emotional tenor of what you showed us, which was really beautiful, was actually quite celebratory and sort of euphoric almost, that sort of celebration in the cave and stuff. So I suppose what I wanted to ask is if either of you could say a bit more about how in your projects the question of scale relates to emotion.
You want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So I think first of all that a lot of participants were the locals, the local community, and for them the scale did represent, like they were really emotional by the scale of work, because the materials is what they were connected to. So these materials were used for like ancient Buddhist monasteries which are around Ladakh, and when the local communities found that the material is being extended from like an architectural or infrastructure to an artwork, it was, so the emotion it was like it was not like a forced connection. They felt connected to the work emotionally because of that. But I feel like if the scale of work was, for me, it is miniature in terms of climate crisis, but it is a 6-meter diameter work. But when they saw the scale of work, if they would have seen it in a smaller scale, I don't know if they would have felt the same connection. And I think here, that's how in my work, the emotion and the scale is connected, because, and who connects them is the community again. Yeah.
Yeah, in the case of Amonate, yeah, this the emotional part is strong. I mean, especially with the interviews that we have done, and the interviewers most of the time weep when they remember the past and the stories that they had in there. It was a very small community, a community that in which they know each other. They have all their amenities in the same place. They were very proud of the company town. They have a theater. There was one physician, and so they were somehow very nostalgic about that time. And when the mine closed or was acquired by private companies, and especially with the introduction of the car in that little town, everything dissolved somehow. So yeah, the fact that they reach to us and they want us to somehow make projects or rebuild structures like the church. The church played a key role in this community. They had at some point 3 churches. Now they have 2, and one only is operative. Actually, it's the community center. They gather in this church. So yeah, the fact that they reached out, they created this Amonate Always, and they're very active in terms of gathering people around, trying to keep this community alive and active. Definitely speak to me as an emotional involvement. But it's not that I want to be kind of. I don't want to see this as a solution. I don't think we have the solution to solve the problem of what they are facing. I think that there's a reality that already passed. It was a company town based on the mine. I don't think that projects like restructuring the church or building even a new building or facility is going to solve the problem. Maybe I'm a little bit pessimistic, but it's also based on what the interviewees have told to us. It's like really something that's not going to return. I mean, something that already passed.
Bhavana, you asked us at the beginning of your presentation to reflect on how we felt during the presentation. I felt a little bit uncomfortable, and I'll explain why. Both of you examined subterranean spaces, caves, caverns, and I felt a little breathy going below ground, feeling kind of compressed, constrained. And it got me thinking about how that kind of physical environment, the subterranean physical environment, confounds in some way our ability as people to use ourselves as references in terms of scale. So I was just wondering, I guess how both of you were thinking about that very particular type of physical environment, subterranean, and more broadly about environments that challenge our abilities to orient ourselves to the world around us.
Okay. So when I was working on this land art project, I did this work within 5 days, and 4 of the 5 days I worked with 2 volunteers, so it was only 3 people creating the work. And the climate, so Ladakh is really hot, so it was just last year this time, and Ladakh is really hot during July, and my skin was really burning. So even while creating the work, the climate was extreme. As an artist, I encountered a very fragile environment, but the making of the work is which took over that emotion. It made me feel like I can keep going on because it gave me more purpose. So I feel like, of course, in photographs, it can feel like really, the cave especially can feel like really enclosed. But I think when it was so windy that I couldn't stand outside and complete the work, I had to go inside the cave, and that's how the cave became comfortable to me. And I think it is different again digitally, going back to that, and experiencing a work. So I think, yeah, that's what I have to say.
Cesar used to say the same things about the Courtauld and so Wenjie asks that we would actually retreat into kind of subterranean or semi-subterranean environments as a kind of respite from the intensity of the physical environment.
Just
please go ahead.
a little thing about the subterranean world. While writing actually this paper, I realized that in the subterranean world the spaces were created by carving, by removing on the above ground level. It was by adding, they were building structures. So first of all, I found that very interesting. And the spaces that they were creating actually were the spaces where they worked, but also and especially related with the explosion in 1957, there were 11 miners died, but there were 14 that survived. And they were sheltered in one of these kind of caves. There's actually drawings. There are actually drawings that are showing that they enclose themselves with bricks and the materials that they found around in order to isolate themselves from any other possible explosions because of the gas leak. So they used at some point, or at that particular moment in that explosion, the same space where they were as a refugee until they found them. They sent, of course, rescuers, and they found them in this kind of, like corner that was actually created with a different purpose. But yeah, they used that space as a refugee at that moment.
Well, I think that I would like to just invite us all to thank you both again for a wonderful panel.